Welcome back to Cheating Tales Lab. Thanks for being here. We've got another juicy story for you. So let's get started. Leroy Morrow's feet pounded the pavement, matching the rhythm of his racing heart. The cool night air stung his lungs as he ran, eyes locked on the taillights of the unfamiliar car that had swallowed his wife moments ago. 18 years of marriage, and this was how it unraveled, with a clandestine rendezvous on a Saturday night. He'd left Max, his loyal German shepherd, with old Mrs. Hanson next door. The woman had peered at him quizzically through her thick glasses when he knocked on her door. "Leroy, is everything all right?" she asked, tightening her robe. "Fine, Mrs. Hanson. Just need to run an errand. Would you mind watching Max for an hour or two?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, dear. You know I adore that big lug." As Max trotted into Mrs. Hanson's house, Leroy was already jogging down the street, his eyes never leaving the car that was now turning onto the main road. Now, as Leroy rounded another corner, he was grateful for the years of marathon training that allowed him to keep pace with the vehicle ahead. His mind raced faster than his feet. Where was Gabriella going? Who was she with? The questions burned in his throat, bitter as bile. The car finally came to a stop outside the Rusty Nail, a dive bar on the outskirts of town that Leroy had driven past countless times but never entered. He slowed to a walk, chest heaving, and ducked behind a rusted-out pickup truck in the gravel lot. From his vantage point, he watched as Gabriella emerged from the passenger side, her familiar silhouette illuminated by the harsh neon of the bar's sign. A man climbed out of the driver's seat, and Leroy felt his stomach lurch. Even in the dim light, there was no mistaking the cocky swagger of Mickey Shepard, the new football coach at Leroy's high school. Leroy's hands clenched into fists as he watched Mickey pull Gabriella close, their lips meeting in a passionate embrace that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "You're insatiable," Mickey growled, loud enough for Leroy to hear. "Can't keep your hands off me, can you?" Gabriella giggled, a sound that cut through Leroy like a knife. "Less talking, more action, coach," she purred. Rage boiled in Leroy's veins, but he forced himself to remain still, to keep watching. He needed more than just suspicion. He needed proof. The couple stumbled towards the seedy motel adjacent to the bar, pawing at each other like hormone-crazed teenagers. Leroy waited until they disappeared into one of the rooms before approaching the motel office. Inside, he found a familiar face behind the counter, Vincent Maynard, a former student who had graduated a few years back. Vincent's eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Morrow? What are you doing here?" Leroy leaned in close, his voice low and urgent. "Vincent, I need your help. It's important." The young man shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know, Mr. Morrow. I could lose my job." "Vincent," Leroy cut him off, his tone brooking no argument. "You remember how I stayed after school for weeks helping you pass physics? How I wrote that college recommendation that got you into state? I'm calling in that favor. Now." Vincent swallowed hard, then nodded. "What do you need?" "The room number for Mickey Shepard and the woman he's with. And access to your security cameras." Vincent's eyes darted nervously to the door. "Mr. Morrow, that's not exactly legal." Leroy's gaze hardened. "Neither is what they're doing to me." "Please, Vincent. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't crucial." After a moment's hesitation, Vincent nodded. He tapped a few keys on his computer, then scribbled something on a piece of paper. "Room 17. And here's the master key. Just be careful, okay?" Leroy nodded gratefully. "I will." And Vincent? This conversation never happened. A few minutes later, Leroy stood outside room 17, his heart pounding in his ears. He could hear muffled laughter and the creak of bed springs from within. Pushing down the bile rising in his throat, he used the master key Vincent had provided to silently open the door. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of a cheap lamp on the nightstand. Clothes were strewn haphazardly across the floor. Leroy moved quickly, snapping photos with his phone. Gabriella's purse, Mickey's wallet, their entangled clothes forming a damning trail to the bed. He was about to leave when Mickey's voice, thick with alcohol and arrogance, drifted from the bathroom. "Can't believe we've been pulling this off for months. That clueless bastard has no idea." Gabriella's giggle followed. Leroy's always been too trusting for his own good. It's almost too easy. Yeah, well, not all of us can be brilliant physicists, Mickey sneered. Some of us have to make do with being irresistible to his wife. Leroy's vision blurred red for a moment, but he forced himself to breathe deeply. Now wasn't the time for confrontation. He needed to be smart about this. As he slipped out of the room, Leroy heard Gabriella's voice once more. God, I love how you make me feel. Leroy never. He shut the door, cutting off her words. His hands were shaking as he made his way back to the motel office. Vincent was waiting, a USB drive in his hand. Security footage, he explained quietly. Mr. Morrow, I'm really sorry about whatever's going on. You were always one of the good ones. Leroy nodded curtly and left, the weight of betrayal settling heavily on his shoulders. The drive home was a blur, his mind replaying the night's events on a sickening loop. The house was quiet when he returned, Max's absence a stark reminder of how quickly everything had changed. Leroy headed straight for his home office, firing up his computer and beginning the task of compiling evidence. Hours passed as he sifted through their financial records. Bank statements showing unexplained withdrawals. Credit card bills with charges for hotels and restaurants he'd never visited. And now, the damning photos and security footage that confirmed his worst fears. As the first rays of dawn began to creep through the windows, Leroy heard the front door open. He tensed, listening to the familiar sound of Gabriella's footsteps as she tried to sneak up the stairs. Mom? Jason's voice, thick with sleep and confusion, stopped Gabriella in her tracks. Leroy moved to the doorway of his office, watching the scene unfold. His 17-year-old son stood at the top of the stairs, Leroy's tablet clutched in his hands. The boy's face was a mask of hurt and anger as he turned the screen towards his mother, displaying the evidence of her infidelity. We don't want you here, Jason's voice trembled, but his words were clear and cutting. Never come back home. Dad will divorce you soon. Get out. Gabriella's face drained of color. Jason, sweetie, I can explain. Explain what? Jason's voice cracked with emotion. How you've been cheating on Dad. How you've been lying to us. It's not that simple, Gabriella pleaded. Your father and I, we've been having problem. Don't you dare try to blame this on me. Leroy's voice cut through the air as he stepped out of the shadows. His tone was eerily calm, a stark contrast to the turmoil in his eyes. Gabriella whirled to face him, her expression shifting from shock to defiance. Leroy, you don't understand. Mickey and Save it. Leroy cut her off. Your things are packed. They're on the porch. I suggest you leave now, before I decide to share these lovely photos with the entire PDA. You wouldn't dare, Gabriella hissed, her eyes narrowing. I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone what a controlling, emotionally abusive. Go ahead. Leroy's smile was cold. See how well your lies hold up against hard evidence. And if you try to retaliate in any way, I promise you, every sordid detail of your affair will become public knowledge. You can't do this. Gabriella's voice took on a pleading tone. What about Jason? What about our family? You should have thought about that before you started screwing the football coach, Jason spat. His young face twisted with disgust. For a moment, Gabriella looked like she might argue further. Then, without another word, she turned and fled down the stairs. The front door slammed behind her, the sound echoing through the suddenly empty house. Jason sagged against the wall, the tablet slipping from his grasp. Leroy moved quickly, wrapping his arms around his son. I'm sorry, Jace. I'm so sorry you had to see that. The boy clung to him, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. How could she do this to us, Dad? Leroy held him tightly, his mind already racing ahead to the battles that were sure to come. I don't know, son, but we'll get through this. Together. As they stood there, father and son united in their pain, Leroy's phone buzzed. A text from Gabriella. This isn't over. You'll regret this. Leroy deleted the message without replying. He guided Jason to the kitchen, his movements automatic as he started brewing a pot of coffee. They had a long day ahead of them. What happens now? Jason asked, his voice small and uncertain. Leroy took a deep breath, considering his words carefully. Now, We protect ourselves. I'll be contacting a lawyer first thing Monday morning. We'll need to secure our finances, change the locks. There's a lot to do. Jason nodded, his young face set with determination. I want to help. Whatever you need, Dad. Pride swelled in Leroy's chest, momentarily displacing the pain. Thank you, son. We're going to need to be strong for each other. As the coffee maker gurgled, Leroy's mind raced through the steps ahead. He'd need to inform the school administration, get ahead of any rumors Gabriella or Mickey might try to spread. There would be legal battles, custody arrangements to sort out, but as he looked at Jason, saw the trust and love in his son's eyes, Leroy felt a surge of resolve. They would weather this storm. And when the dust settled, Gabriella and Mickey would learn the hard way that they had grossly underestimated Leroy Morrow. The game had changed, and Leroy was ready to play for keeps. As the sun rose fully, casting its light on a world forever changed, Leroy Morrow made a silent vow. He would not let this betrayal break him. He would not let Gabriella and Mickey's actions destroy the life he had built. And he would sure as hell make them regret ever crossing him. Dad. Jason's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Are you okay? Leroy managed a small smile. I will be, Jace. We both will be. It's going to be tough for a while, but we've got each other. That's what matters. Jason nodded, then his face hardened. I hate her for what she's done to you. To us. I know, son. But don't let that hate consume you. We're better than that. We'll handle this the right way, and we'll come out stronger on the other side. As they sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and planning their next moves, Leroy felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The initial shock and pain were still there, but they were overshadowed by a steely determination. Gabriella had made her choice. Now it was time for Leroy to make his. And he chose to fight. For his dignity, for his son, and for the future they deserved. The betrayal had blindsided him, but Leroy Morrow was far from defeated. In fact, he was just getting started. Monday morning arrived with a sense of foreboding. Leroy Morrow stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie with steady hands that belied the turmoil within. The events of the weekend felt like a distant nightmare, but the empty bed behind him was a stark reminder of his new reality. As he drove to Oak Ridge High, Leroy's mind raced through potential scenarios. He knew confronting Mickey Shepard was inevitable, but he was determined to maintain control. The last thing he needed was to give that smug bastard any ammunition. The teacher's lounge was abuzz with the usual Monday morning chatter when Leroy entered. A few colleagues shot him curious glances, no doubt sensing the tension radiating off him. He poured himself a cup of coffee, pointedly ignoring the corner where Mickey usually held court with his sycophantic admirers. Well, if it isn't the brilliant Mr. Morrow. Leroy turned slowly, coming face to face with Mickey Shepard's cocky grin. The football coach leaned against the counter, his muscled arms folded across his chest. Heard you've been having some trouble at home, Mickey continued, his voice dripping with false concern. Real shame. Hope everything works out for you. Leroy took a sip of his coffee, his expression neutral. I appreciate your concern, Mickey, but I think you should be more worried about your own future. Mickey's grin faltered for a moment before returning full force. Is that a threat, Morrow? Because I gotta say, coming from a scrawny little physics nerd, it's not very intimidating. In one fluid motion, Mickey closed the distance between them, using his larger frame to loom over Leroy. Maybe you should stick to your equations and leave the real men's business to guys like me. The lounge had gone silent, all eyes on the confrontation. Leroy set his coffee cup down with deliberate calm. You know, Mickey, there's an interesting principle in physics called leverage. It states that even a small force, applied correctly, can overcome a much larger one. Mickey's brow furrowed in confusion. What the hell are you? His words were cut off as Leroy moved with lightning speed. In a series of precise movements, he grabbed Mickey's wrist, twisted, and used the larger man's momentum against him. Before anyone could blink, Mickey was face down on the floor, his arm painfully wrenched behind his back. You see, Leroy continued conversationally, it's all about applying pressure to the right points. A concept you might want to familiarize yourself with, both on and off the field. The lounge erupted in shocked murmurs. Mickey struggled, his face red with exertion and humiliation. Get off me, you psycho. I'll have your job for this. Mr. Morrow. Mr. Shepard. My office now. Principal Chris Sullivan's voice cut through the chaos. Leroy released Mickey, stepping back as the coach scrambled to his feet. This isn't over, Mickey hissed, rubbing his sore arm. Leroy met his glare evenly. Oh, I think it is. In Sullivan's office, Mickey launched into a tirade before the door had fully closed. Did you see what that maniac did to me? I want him fired, suspended, arrested. Sullivan held up a hand, silencing him. Enough, Mickey. Leroy, care to explain what happened? Leroy nodded, his demeanor calm and professional. Certainly, Chris. But before I do, there's something you need to see. He pulled out a USB drive and handed it to the principal. This contains security footage from the Rusty Nail Motel, taken this past Saturday night. It shows Coach Shepard engaging in inappropriate behavior with my wife. Mickey's face drained of color. You're bluffing. There's no way. I assure you, it's quite real. Leroy cut him off. Along with credit card receipts, text messages, and eyewitness accounts from several of our students who've seen you two together. Sullivan's expression hardened as he plugged in the drive and watched the footage. After a few moments, he turned to Mickey, disgust evident in his eyes. Is this true, Shepard? Mickey's bravado crumbled. Look, it's not what it seems. We're both consenting adults and… Save it. Sullivan snapped. You're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. I suggest you leave the premises now before I have security escort you out. As Mickey stormed out, slamming the door behind him, Sullivan turned to Leroy. I'm sorry you had to go through this, Leroy. We'll handle the situation discreetly. Leroy nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate your understanding. As he left the office, Leroy couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. Round one had gone to him, but he knew the battle was far from over. News of the affair spread through Oak Ridge like wildfire. By lunchtime, whispers and sidelong glances followed Leroy through the hallways. But to his surprise, the looks weren't of judgment or pity. Instead, he saw respect and even admiration in the eyes of his colleagues and students. Meanwhile, across town, Gabriella Morrow was having a very different experience. She sat in her real estate office, staring at her silent phone. The calls that usually flooded in on a Monday morning were conspicuously absent. Her assistant, Jenny, knocked timidly on the door. Ms. Morrow? The Petersons called. They want to cancel their listing appointment this afternoon. Gabriella's grip tightened on her desk. Did they say why? Jenny shifted uncomfortably. They said they didn't feel comfortable working with someone of your character. My character? Gabriella's voice rose sharply. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I'm sorry, Ms. Morrow. It's just, people are talking about you and Coach Shepard. Gabriella's blood ran cold. How had it spread so quickly? She dismissed Jenny with a wave, then frantically began scrolling through her social media. Her inbox was flooded with messages, ranging from disappointed to outright hostile. This can't be happening, she muttered, her perfectly manicured nails clacking against her phone screen as she typed out a hasty post. Friends and clients, I'm deeply hurt by the vicious rumors circulating about my personal life. My husband and I have been experiencing difficulties, and Coach Shepard has been a supportive friend during this trying time. Any insinuations of impropriety are baseless and cruel. I ask for privacy and understanding as we navigate this difficult period. She hit post, then sat back, taking a deep breath. She could salvage this. She just needed to control the narrative. Across town, Mickey Shepard paced his small apartment, phone pressed to his ear. Pick up, damn it. He growled as Gabriella's voicemail kicked in for the third time. A text from his assistant coach pinged. Dude, what the hell? The whole team's talking about you banging Morrow's wife. Tell me it's not true. Mickey hurled the phone across the room with a roar of frustration. This couldn't be happening. He'd worked too hard, climbed too far, to let it all slip away now. His phone buzzed again from its new resting place under the couch. He retrieved it, seeing Gabriella's name on the screen. About time, he snapped. Have you seen what's happening? We need to get our stories straight. Gabriella's voice was tense. I've already made a statement on social media. We're just friends. You've been supporting me through marital difficulties. Got it. Mickey scoffed. You think that weak-ass story is gonna cut it? We need something bigger. Something to take the heat off us and put it on that sanctimonious prick Leroy. Like what? I don't know. Say he was abusive. Controlling. That's why you turned to me. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mickey, that's a serious accusation. I can't just. You can and you will, Mickey snarled. Unless you want your precious reputation completely destroyed. We're in this together, sweetheart. Time to pick a side. As he hung up, Mickey didn't notice the small device blinking steadily from the potted plant on his windowsill. In an unmarked van across the street, Marco Dudley, private investigator, smiled as he adjusted his headphones. Got you, you son of a bitch, he muttered, hitting the stop button on his recorder. Back at Oak Ridge High, Leroy was surprised to find a small crowd gathered outside his classroom after the final bell. Former students, fellow teachers, even a few parents stood waiting, concern etched on their faces. Mr. Morrow, one of his former students, now a college freshman, stepped forward. We heard what happened. We just wanted you to know. We're here for you. Whatever you need. Leroy felt a lump form in his throat. Thank you, he managed, genuinely touched by the show of support. As the crowd dispersed, Leroy's phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Got something big. Meet me at your place ASAP. Leroy hurried home, his mind racing. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw Marco's nondescript van already parked on the street. Inside, Marco was waiting with Jason, a smile on his face. You're gonna want to hear this, he said, hitting play on his recorder. As Mickey and Gabriella's conversation filled the room, Leroy felt a mix of anger and vindication wash over him. Jason's face darkened with each word. They're trying to paint you as the bad guy, the teenager spat. After everything they've done, Leroy placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Let them try. We've got the truth on our side. Marco nodded. And now we've got proof of their conspiracy. This'll be gold in court, Leroy. As Marco left, promising to get the recording properly processed and authenticated, Leroy turned to Jason. You okay, kiddo? Jason nodded, his jaw set in determination. Yeah, I can't believe Mom would stoop so low. Leroy sighed. People do desperate things when they're backed into a corner. But we're not going to let them win. We're going to take the high road. How? Jason asked skeptically. Leroy smiled. By focusing on what matters. Speaking of which, don't you have a science fair project to work on? Jason's eyes lit up. Yeah, we're building a scale model of a sustainable city. It's gonna be awesome. As they headed to the garage to work on the project, Leroy felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wouldn't let Gabriella and Mickey's schemes distract him from what truly mattered, his son, his students, and the life they were rebuilding together. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Leroy threw himself into preparing his students for the upcoming state science fair, determined not to let his personal turmoil affect their chances. The kids responded with enthusiasm, staying late after school and even coming in on weekends to perfect their projects. It was during one of these late-night sessions, just days before the fair, that disaster struck. Leroy had stayed behind to lock up after the last student left. As he did a final sweep of the science lab, he noticed something off about one of the main projects, a complex model demonstrating clean energy distribution in urban environments. Upon closer inspection, his heart sank. Crucial components had been damaged, wires cut, and the central computer system wiped clean. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged their work. Leroy's first instinct was to call the police, but he hesitated. A formal investigation would take time they didn't have, and it would crush his students' spirits. No, he needed to handle this himself. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marco. I need your help. And bring your best surveillance equipment. The next morning, Leroy gathered his dejected students in the lab. I know this looks bad, he said, looking at their crestfallen faces. But we're not giving up. We're going to rebuild, better than before. And we're going to catch whoever did this. As the kids set to work, fueled by a mix of determination and righteous anger, Leroy pulled aside his most trusted student, Sarah. I need your help with something, he said quietly, outlining his plan. That night, the lab was dark and silent. Hidden cameras, courtesy of Marco, covered every angle. Leroy and Sarah crouched in a supply closet, watching the feeds on a tablet. Hours passed. Leroy was beginning to think he'd miscalculated when a shadow passed across one of the screens. The door to the lab creaked open, and a familiar figure slipped inside. I knew it, Sarah whispered as Mickey Shepard's face came into view. They watched as Mickey approached the partially rebuilt project, a pair of wire cutters in his hand. Just as he was about to strike, Leroy burst from the closet. Freeze! Mickey whirled, his face a mask of shock and rage. You! How did you? Did you really think I'd leave the lab unguarded after what you did? Leroy's voice was cold. It's over, Mickey. We've got you on camera. Breaking and entering, destruction of property, attempted sabotage. Your coaching career is done. Mickey lunged, swinging wildly. But Leroy was prepared. He sidestepped the attack, using Mickey's momentum to send him crashing into a lab table. By the time Mickey regained his feet, Marco and 2 police officers had entered the room. As Mickey was led away in handcuffs, spitting threats and obscenities, Leroy turned to his wide-eyed student. You okay, Sarah? She nodded, a grin spreading across her face. That was awesome, Mr. Morrow. Wait till the others hear about this. Leroy chuckled. Let's focus on finishing our project first. We've got a science fair to win. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. News of Mickey's arrest spread quickly, cementing Leroy's status as a local hero. But he paid little attention to the gossip, pouring all his energy into helping his students rebuild their project. The night before the fair, Leroy surveyed the finished model with pride. It wasn't just as good as the original, it was better. His students had taken the setback as a challenge, innovating and improving at every step. We did it, Mr. Morrow, Jason said, clapping his father on the back. We actually did it. Leroy smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the late hour or the coffee they'd been mainlining. No, son. You did it. All of you. I just provided the coffee and moral support. The state science fair was a blur of nervous energy and last-minute adjustments. Leroy watched from the sidelines as his students presented their project to the judges, fielding questions with confidence and enthusiasm. When the winners were announced, Leroy wasn't surprised to hear Oak Ridge High called for not 1, but 3 top awards. The students erupted in cheers, mobbing him in a group hug that nearly knocked him off his feet. As they posed for photos with their trophies, Leroy caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Gabriella stood at the back of the auditorium, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met for a moment before she turned and walked away. Leroy felt a twinge of something. Not regret, exactly, but a sense of finality. The last thread connecting him to his old life had been severed. He turned back to his celebrating students, pushing the thought from his mind. This was his life now, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Gabriella Morrow stared at her reflection in the mirror of the cheap motel room she now called home. Her once flawless makeup was smudged, dark circles prominent under her eyes. How had it come to this? Next to her, Mickey Shepard sprawled on the unmade bed, flipping through channels on the ancient TV. Would you stop primping already? We've got work to do. Gabriella's lip curled in disgust. The initial thrill of their affair had long since faded, leaving behind only bitterness and desperation. And what brilliant plan have you cooked up this time, Mickey? Your last one worked out so well. Mickey sat up, his eyes narrowing. Watch your tone, sweetheart. Remember, we're in this together. Unless you want to crawl back to your ex and beg for scraps. The thought of facing Leroy again made Gabriella's stomach churn. She'd underestimated him, badly. The meek, predictable husband she'd taken for granted had transformed into a formidable opponent, systematically dismantling the life she'd built. Fine, she snapped. What's the plan? Mickey's grin was all predator. We're going to hit him where it hurts. His precious reputation. As Mickey outlined his scheme, Gabriella felt a flicker of doubt. Fabricating evidence of abuse seemed like a dangerous gamble. But what choice did she have? Her real estate business was in shambles, her social circle had abandoned her, and the divorce proceedings were not going in her favor. "It'll work," Mickey assured her, mistaking her silence for hesitation. "Trust me. Once we're done, Leroy Morrow won't know what hit him." Across town, in a sleek office overlooking Main Street, Leroy sat across from his lawyer, Melody Hancock. The petite, silver-haired woman exuded an aura of calm competence that had immediately put Leroy at ease when they first met. "So," Melody said, shuffling through a stack of papers, "our sources indicate that Gabriella and her companion are planning something big for the upcoming hearing. Are you prepared for whatever they might throw at us?" Leroy nodded, his expression grim. "As ready as I can be. But I have to admit, I'm worried about Jason. This whole ordeal has been hard on him." Melody's eyes softened. "That's understandable. But from what you've told me, he's a strong kid. And he has you in his corner." "Thanks, Melody. So, what's our strategy?" The lawyer's smile turned predatory. "We go on the offensive. I've compiled a comprehensive record of Gabriella's infidelity, financial misconduct, and recent attempts at sabotage. By the time I'm done, the judge will see exactly who the real victim is in this situation." As Leroy left the office, he felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. The final showdown was approaching, and he was determined to emerge victorious, not just for himself, but for Jason. The day of the hearing arrived, the courthouse steps crowded with reporters and curious onlookers. Leroy strode up confidently, Jason at his side. They ignored the shouted questions and camera flashes, focusing on the battle ahead. Inside, Gabriella and Mickey were already seated, their heads bent close in whispered conversation. Gabriella's eyes widened slightly when she saw Leroy, quickly averting her gaze. Mickey, however, met Leroy's stare with a smug grin. As the proceedings began, Gabriella's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, launched into an impassioned speech about his client's years of suffering under an emotionally abusive husband. He presented a series of emails and text messages, purportedly showing Leroy's controlling and manipulative behavior. Leroy's fists clenched under the table, fury rising in his chest. It was all lies, carefully crafted half-truths designed to paint him as a monster. He glanced at Jason, seeing the same anger reflected in his son's eyes. When it was Melody's turn to present their case, she rose slowly, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the theatrical performance of Gabriella's lawyer. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and steady, "the evidence presented by the opposing counsel is a fabrication, a desperate attempt by Mrs. Morrow and her paramour to manipulate this court. I have here a comprehensive record of the true facts in this case." Over the next hour, Melody systematically dismantled Gabriella's claims. She presented financial records showing Gabriella's misuse of joint accounts to fund her affair. Eyewitness testimonies from neighbors and colleagues painted a picture of Leroy as a devoted husband and father. And finally, she played the damning recording of Mickey and Gabriella plotting to discredit Leroy. As the evidence mounted, Gabriella seemed to shrink in her seat. Mickey's smug expression had long since vanished, replaced by barely contained panic. Leroy, for his part, remained stoic, his eyes fixed on the judge. When Melody finished her presentation, the courtroom was silent. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, surveyed the room with piercing eyes. "I've seen a lot in my years on the bench," she said finally, her voice heavy with disapproval, "but rarely have I encountered such a blatant attempt to pervert the course of justice. Mrs. Morrow, Mr. Shepard, your actions are reprehensible." Turning to Leroy, her expression softened slightly. "Mr. Morrow, in light of the evidence presented, I am granting your petition for divorce. You will receive full custody of your son, Jason, and retain ownership of the family home. Mrs. Morrow, you will be responsible for all legal fees incurred during these proceedings." As the judge's gavel fell, sealing the verdict, a wave of relief washed over Leroy. It was over. They had won. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions. Leroy put a protective arm around Jason, guiding him through the crowd. From the corner of his eye, he saw Gabriella and Mickey being cornered by a particularly aggressive group of journalists. "Dad," Jason said quietly as they reached their car, "is it really over?" Leroy smiled, squeezing his son's shoulder. The legal battle is, kiddo. But something tells me Gabriella and Mickey aren't done trying to cause trouble. He was right. A week after the court's decision, Gabriella and Mickey appeared on a local news station, painting themselves as victims of a vindictive husband and a biased legal system. Leroy Morrow has everyone fooled, Gabriella said, her eyes brimming with carefully rehearsed tears. He's manipulated the entire town, turned my own son against me. I just want the truth to come out. Mickey nodded solemnly beside her. As an educator, I feel it's my duty to speak out against this injustice. Mr. Morrow's influence over the school board and local officials is deeply concerning. Leroy watched the interview with a mixture of disgust and determination. He'd anticipated this move, and he was ready to counter it. The next day, he called a town hall meeting. The community center was packed, curious faces turning to watch as Leroy took the stage. Jason sat in the front row, offering a supportive nod. I know many of you saw last night's interview with my ex-wife and Mickey Shepard, Leroy began, his voice steady. I'm not here to sling mud or make accusations. I'm here to present facts. Over the next hour, Leroy laid out the full story of Gabriella and Mickey's affair, their attempts to discredit him, and the evidence that had swayed the judge. He played recordings, showed financial documents, and presented testimonies from students and colleagues. I don't ask for your sympathy, he concluded. I only ask that you consider the facts and draw your own conclusions. Thank you. The room erupted in applause as Leroy stepped down from the podium. People surged forward, offering handshakes and words of support. In the back of the room, a grim-faced man in a suit quietly took notes. The fallout was swift and merciless. The State Real Estate Board launched an ethics investigation into Gabriella's conduct, suspending her license pending the results. Mickey found himself facing potential criminal charges for his role in the science fair sabotage. Weeks turned into months. Leroy and Jason settled into a new routine, slowly rebuilding their lives. They remodeled the house, erasing painful memories and creating a fresh start. Leroy threw himself into his work, his dedication earning him a promotion to head of the science department. Before they knew it, Jason's graduation day had arrived. Leroy stood at the podium, looking out over a sea of caps and gowns, his chest swelling with pride. Life will test you, he said, his voice carrying across the hushed auditorium. It will throw challenges at you that seem insurmountable. But remember this, integrity and resilience are not just words. They are choices we make every day. Choose wisely, and there is no obstacle you cannot overcome. As he spoke, a movement at the back of the room caught his eye. Gabriella slipped in, looking haggard and remorseful. Their eyes met for a brief moment before Leroy continued his speech. After the ceremony, as families and friends mingled on the lawn, Gabriella approached hesitantly. Leroy, Jason, I don't know what to say. Leroy's expression remained neutral. I think you've said plenty over the past few months, Gabriella. She flinched at his tone but pressed on. I know I've made terrible mistakes. I miss my son. Jason, please, can we talk? Leroy looked at Jason, allowing him to make his own decision. Without hesitation, Jason turned his back on Gabriella. I have nothing to say to you, he said coldly, walking away. Leroy watched his ex-wife's face crumple, feeling a twinge of, not pity, exactly, but a sort of detached sadness for what might have been. Goodbye, Gabriella, he said quietly, following his son. That evening, Leroy and Jason hosted a graduation party. Their home was filled with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the tension that had permeated it months before. Friends, family, and supporters gathered to celebrate not just Jason's achievement, but the strength and resilience both Morrows had shown. As Leroy raised a toast to his son, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. They had weathered the storm, emerging stronger and closer than ever. The future stretched out before them, bright and full of possibility. To new beginnings, Leroy said, clinking his glass against Jason's. Jason grinned, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and determination. And to unbreakable bonds. As the party continued around them, father and son shared a moment of understanding. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bond forged in adversity and tempered by love. The night wore on, filled with music, laughter, and the warmth of true friendship. And as Leroy looked around at the life he and Jason had rebuilt, he knew that the best was yet to come.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
For years, my wife Kathy and I lived in a whirlwind of constant activity. Work, house construction issues, and career ambitions kept us on edge, though we somehow found comfort in the chaos. Even our arguments, usually over small things like schedules or future plans, never really shook our relationship. I thought we were strong enough to handle anything life threw at us. But in hindsight, I now see the early signs of trouble. Small changes in behavior, unspoken tensions, and a growing emotional distance between us became more noticeable. Our conversations felt strained, our closeness less frequent, and I began to feel Kathy pulling away. I never imagined those minor issues would eventually lead to a painful revelation that would turn my world upside down. I woke suddenly, glancing at the clock. 2:30 a.m. My shirt was soaked with sweat, as it always was after that recurring dream. This time, I hadn't spoken out loud. Kathy was still asleep beside me. The dream always played out the same, a distorted memory from 2 years ago. In it, I'd sit at my desk with a bottle of whiskey, an empty glass, and a weapon. I'd down the drink without tasting it, check the revolver's loaded cylinder, and mutter threats of revenge. Thankfully, these dreams were becoming less frequent, now occurring only once every couple of months. Despite how vivid they felt, the dream had little to do with what actually happened. Yes, there was a bottle of scotch, but I was passed out on the sofa, and there was no weapon involved. To understand how things got to this point, I need to go back several years. 2002 was a tough year. It began with Kathy and me arguing with city inspectors over the design of our new house. After several permit rejections, we finally got approval in August, but dealing with our contractor was another battle. Meanwhile, we were both busy with our careers. I was working at Independent Investigations Corporation, a company that investigates insurance fraud. I was 30 years old and the lead investigator, able to choose my cases and assign others. The job was lucrative, and by then I was starting to notice a few gray hairs creeping in. People called me confident, but I wasn't anything special, just a guy with a crooked nose from an old college boxing match, standing at 6 feet 2 inches and 185 pounds. Kathy, at 29, was the most attractive woman I knew. With her long, dark brown hair and striking blue-green eyes, she was slim and athletic, managing the accounting department at DCNH. Her company was doing well, and she'd been receiving nice bonuses. But early in 2002, there was a shakeup at her office when the Indianapolis manager was replaced by Greg Bartlett. That's when things started to change. Greg was about 5 feet 5 inches, overweight, and mostly bald, with just a ring of hair around his head. Kathy thought he was a good manager, and when I met him, I found him likable enough. Around the same time Greg came to Indianapolis, DCNH brought in a vice president, Jack Hansen from New York. Jack was about 45 in good shape, and seemed like the type who had a wandering eye. He struck me as the kind of guy who didn't let marriage stop him from pursuing women. Kathy, however, thought highly of him, and constantly talked about his great ideas for boosting business. By summer, our house was finally on schedule, and things at DCNH had settled down. Kathy said business was improving thanks to Hansen. We moved into our new home outside Indianapolis in August and loved it from the start. Jokingly, I told Kathy, "I want to make love in every room of the house." She took me by the hand and led me to the kitchen. "We'll start with the kitchen," she said. What followed was amazing sex, and although we didn't make it to the other rooms, we stayed close in the bedroom despite our busy schedules. Still, with work and settling into the new house, our moments were becoming limited to the bedroom at night. One night, I brought up starting a family. "I think it's time to get off the pill and have a baby," I said. "I want to wait," Kathy replied. Jack suggested I hold off until next year since I'm in line for a promotion. Jack? I asked, a little irritated. Yeah, Jack Hansen. He thought it'd be smarter to wait until after the promotion. Why are you talking to him about our family plans? I asked, annoyed. Kathy explained that he'd asked if we were planning kids, and she mentioned our timeline, prompting his suggestion to delay. Although I wasn't thrilled, I agreed to wait. By the end of the year, we were both swamped with work and not spending much time together. Weekends were supposed to be our time, but even those were getting eaten up by work. Kathy's department was busy trying to land a big merger, and I was juggling multiple investigations. On the last weekend of November, we finally had some time off together. We did our Christmas shopping, and over dinner, Kathy shared some good news. We're about to close a merger with National Pharmaceutical by December 20th, which means I should get my promotion. That's great, I said, excited for her. Then we can start trying for a baby. Not yet, she said. I'm still on the pill, and I want to settle into my new job before going on maternity leave. I understood, but I was still a bit disappointed. Trying to lighten the mood, I joked, should I buy stock in National Pharmaceutical? Absolutely not, she laughed. That's insider trading, and we'd go to jail. I'm kidding, I said. I'd never risk that. I know, she said softly. I'm just nervous because we're so close to sealing this deal, and I don't want anything to go wrong. December is company Christmas party season, and ours at IIC was on Friday, December 6th. It was a pretty tame event with about 43 people, including employees and their significant others. We had drinks, appetizers, dinner, and then some dancing. Since most of us are field investigators who don't work closely together, we didn't know each other well, which made the party low-key. I sat with my close friend Bill Ripley and his wife Susan. Kathy and I had a good time despite the quiet atmosphere. We stayed until midnight before heading home. Once home, I led Kathy to the bedroom, kissed her, and things quickly heated up. Kathy surprised me with some bold, new behavior, which took me off guard, but had an obvious effect. Afterward, she headed to the bathroom, teasing me about continuing our escapades in other rooms of the house. The next day, things shifted. I worked half the day, and when I got home, Kathy was staring out the window, lost in thought. She seemed upset and didn't respond to me at first. I decided to give her space and waited until after dinner to ask what was wrong. During dinner, Kathy cooked, and I cleaned up as per our usual arrangement. Once I finished, I sat with her in the family room and asked, "Kathy, what's bothering you? Can I help?" She finally opened up, saying there were problems with the National Pharmaceutical deal. The president, Mr. Benson, was making unreasonable demands, and if they didn't comply, the deal could fall through. Kathy was afraid this failure might cost her her job. I tried to reassure her, but she was adamant that if things went south, it would be on her. However, she couldn't share any more details because of confidentiality issues. She ended the conversation firmly, saying she had to handle it on her own. The next day, Kathy seemed even more distant. She barely spoke, and by Monday morning, she left for work early, claiming she had important meetings. After she left, I took out the trash, but when I emptied the wastebasket from our bathroom, something fell out and disappeared. After searching for it briefly, I gave up, finished taking out the trash, and moved on with my day. When I came back inside, I took another quick look around the kitchen for whatever had fallen from the wastebasket, but didn't find anything. I showered and got ready for work. By Monday evening, Kathy's mood hadn't improved, so I gently asked, "Are things better at work?" "I can't talk about it," she said, clearly stressed, "but I'll get through it." On Wednesday, Kathy seemed better. She greeted me with a kiss and said she loved me, something she hadn't done since Friday. Though she wasn't fully back to normal, the distant look was gone. "Can you tell me what's going on now?" I asked cautiously. "I'm not supposed to talk about it," she said, "but we've found a way to make Mr. Benson happy. Jack thinks it'll be okay now." Her tone was more relieved, though still tense. She didn't smile, so I knew she was still stressed, but I hoped things would settle soon. It bothered me that Kathy called Hansen Jack, while still referring to Greg Bartlett As Mr. Bartlett, I didn't understand the inconsistency. That night in bed, Kathy wanted me to hold her, but didn't want to make love. I could feel the strain her work was putting on us. After she fell asleep, I tossed and turned for 20 minutes, then went to the kitchen for a drink. While there, I noticed Kathy's briefcase on the chair. For the first time, I decided to look inside. It wasn't locked, so I opened it, but most of the papers didn't tell me anything. Then I found her day planner. Kathy had several meetings scheduled with Bartlett and Hansen, including one with Mr. Benson. I was confused about why she, in accounting, was meeting with a customer. Her planner also noted a strange numbering from December 6th to December 20th, with the 20th circled. I wasn't sure if it had to do with their Christmas party or the contract signing with Mr. Benson, but I knew the 20th was important. I put the planner back and returned the briefcase to its place. Over the next few days, Kathy's mood improved, but she remained distant. Using my skills as an investigator, I pieced together that December 20th was crucial. If Mr. Benson was going to sign the contract with DCNH, it would likely happen that day. On Friday, December 13th, I closed one of my 3 cases and was close to finishing another. That night, I met up with Bill Ripley for a beer to celebrate. After a couple of drinks, I mentioned the mystery in Kathy's day planner without revealing it was hers. I explained the numbered days leading up to the 20th, which was circled and underlined. Bill couldn't help but suggested I ask Mary Farrell, one of our female investigators, for a different perspective. He was right. I needed a woman's insight. We dropped the topic, and later Bill joked that if I ever started my own agency, he'd want in. We laughed about it, and I told him he'd be the first person I'd call if it ever happened. That weekend was frustrating. Although Kathy was affectionate, we still didn't have sex, which was starting to bother me. Not just because of the lack of closeness, but because I didn't understand why. Monday morning, I told her I'd likely be working late all week to close my cases. "You can't work late Friday," she said. "You need to be home by 7 to get ready for the party." I agreed, though by midweek, I was growing frustrated and even a little angry. I closed my second case on Tuesday, and we went out to dinner to celebrate. But afterward, Kathy said she wasn't feeling well. So again, no sex. The same thing happened Wednesday night, and it was becoming harder for me to keep calm. I knew she was stressed, but I was reaching my limit. I convinced myself that by Friday, once the national pharmaceutical deal was settled, everything would get better, and we'd be back to normal. On Thursday, I was close to closing my last case, and told Kathy that I might struggle to be home by 7 o'clock. She was upset. "You promised," she said. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I'm so close to closing this," I explained, trying to calm her. I suggested she go to the party without me if I was late, and I'd meet her there by 9 o'clock. She reluctantly agreed, but didn't want to go alone. On Friday morning, I got a break in my case. I had been working to recover stolen jewelry, insured for over $1 million. The thief had offered to sell the jewelry back for $250,000, which would save the insurance company $750,000. I had finally gained the trust of the thief and set up a meeting to handle the exchange. After setting up the meeting, I went to the insurance office to get the money for the exchange. The paperwork for such a large amount takes time, but I had already identified the thief and followed him to a coffee shop on Friday morning. I called him to arrange the afternoon exchange, then tailed him to an old garage. He opened the trunk of a car, but left without taking anything, and after checking his surroundings, he left. Once he was gone, I broke the padlock with a tire iron, opened the trunk, and found the stolen jewelry inside a canvas bag. I left a note saying, "Better luck next time," locked the garage, and returned to my office. I called the insurance company to arrange for someone to pick up the jewels. It felt great knowing I prevented the thief from profiting, saved the insurance company a lot of money, and helped return the jewelry to the owners. Afterward, I saw Mary Farrell, one of our investigators, and invited her to lunch, hoping to get her perspective on the notations in Kathy's day planner. Over pastrami sandwiches, I explained the numbered days leading up to the 20th. Mary thought for a moment, then smiled and said the numbers likely tracked Kathy's menstrual cycle, with the 20th being her most fertile day. I was stunned. The idea had never crossed my mind. Kathy wasn't supposed to stop birth control until February, so why would she track her cycle now? Could she be doing it for someone else? The thought left me uneasy. I knew from experience not to jump to conclusions without all the facts, so I told myself to be patient. By 5 p.m., I wrapped up my work, feeling good about closing 3 cases, and getting some insight into Kathy's planner. I headed home, planning to take Kathy to her party that evening, and hoping it would ease some of her stress. I got home by 5:30 p.m., parking in the driveway, knowing we'd be leaving soon. I walked down to get the mail and headed toward the front door. I hadn't checked the garage, so I didn't know if Kathy was home. As I was about to unlock the door, I noticed the hall light on. Looking through the small window, I saw Kathy coming down the stairs, completely unclothed, holding a towel and a can of shaving cream. I stepped back from the window, not wanting to scare her. She walked into the living room and stood near a chair, looking like she'd forgotten why she was there. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She looked stunning, but I realized I had to move before she noticed me. I decided to go through the garage so she'd hear me coming. I reluctantly pulled myself away, got in my car, and opened the garage door. After parking and letting the door close, I walked into the house and called out, "Kathy, I'm home." I thought I heard a door close upstairs. When I reached our bedroom, I called again. Kathy responded, "You're home early." "I'm getting ready in the bathroom." "Why don't you use the guest bathroom?" she suggested. Suspicious, I ignored her and opened the door. Kathy was sitting on the bathtub, trying to cover herself as she prepared to shave. "It was supposed to be a surprise," she said, forcing a smile. "For who?" I asked sharply. "For you," she quickly replied. "I thought it would surprise you after the party." I pressed her, saying, "I never mentioned wanting you to shave. Where'd you get that idea?" Kathy stammered, saying she thought it would be something different, that many women were doing it, and she thought I might like it. "We should have talked about it first," I said, irritated. She softly replied, "It's my body, and if I want to shave, I can. If we don't like it, it'll grow back." Though she had a point, I wasn't ready to let it go. "Don't shave it now," I said firmly. "We'll discuss it later, and if you really want to, you can do it tomorrow." Kathy's expression wasn't just angry. It was also fearful, which confused me. I understood her frustration, but couldn't figure out the fear. "I'm ready to do it now, so why should I wait?" she said defiantly. "Because your husband is asking you to wait," I replied, meeting her gaze. "I don't like bald kitties. Why does this need to happen now?" "It's my hair, and I'll shave it if I want to," she shot back, her frustration growing. "Go ahead then, but if you do, you're going to the party alone," I said coldly. Kathy was shocked. "What? Why are you being so unfair? It's just something I want to do." "I don't think you're being honest about why you want to shave," I said firmly. "You know I like your hair, so you weren't thinking of me. If you can't tell me the truth, we won't talk about it anymore. Shave it and go alone, or leave it, and we'll go together. It's your choice." Kathy gave me a sullen look, put the razor down, and got in the shower. Afterward, I showered too, then lounged in my bathrobe while she got ready in silence. I could tell she was angry, and I didn't want to provoke her further, so I watched her quietly. As she dressed, slipping into black thigh-high stockings and a cocktail dress, I couldn't help but notice how sexy she looked. But I wondered if she was dressing for me, or for someone else. At 7:30, I asked if she was ready to go. "Yes," she replied coldly. "You look really hot," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "You're going to melt someone's heart tonight." "Yours, I hope," she said, over her shoulder as she walked out, leaving me wondering if she meant to melt my heart or break it. During the drive, we were silent for the first 15 minutes before Kathy apologized. "I'm sorry about the shaving thing. I was just nervous about tonight and snapped." "No problem," I said. "Let's focus on having fun tonight." The party was at the company's offices. Shortly after we arrived, Hanson came over, pulled Kathy aside, and started talking to her. I watched closely, trying to read their interaction. It seemed tense at first, but then Hanson smiled, and Kathy reluctantly nodded. When she returned, I asked, "What did he want?" "The national pharmaceutical deal is closing tonight. I have a meeting at 10 o'clock with Jack and Mr. Bartlett. If it goes well, we'll get the contract." "So, you'll get your promotion?" I asked, trying to sound enthusiastic. "Yes, if everything works out," she said, but without much excitement. Kathy didn't seem as happy as she should have been. I tried testing her mood further. "Then we can start trying for a baby?" "Yes, we can start our family," she replied flatly. I wanted to shake her and ask, "What's going on?" I was beginning to sense something deeper, and I knew I had to figure out how to handle it. As we entered the party, Kathy slipped her arm through mine and leaned in close. The room was nicely decorated, with tables around the edges, a band playing, a dance floor, and a buffet with an open bar. I scanned the room, recognizing most of the faces. It didn't take long to spot him. A man by the bar, around 35, 6 feet tall, fit, in a dark blue Armani suit. I pointed him out to Kathy. "Who's that guy by the bar?" I asked. "I don't know," she replied, too casually, her body language stiff. I could tell she wasn't being truthful. "Let's go get a drink," I suggested. "I need to say hi to my coworkers." "Why don't you get us drinks?" she said, avoiding eye contact. I went to the bar, ordered her a red wine, and got myself a beer. Then I turned to the man in the suit. "Mr. Benson, how are you tonight?" I asked. He looked surprised. "How do you know me?" "It's my job," I said. "I need to take this wine to my wife, but I'd like to talk to you afterward." He seemed uneasy, but agreed. I handed Kathy her drink and told her I'd be back after circulating the room. She looked worried, but didn't stop me. Once she wasn't watching, I returned to Benson. "I work in security for DCNH, I lied, just making sure everything goes smoothly. Hanson has some fun planned, right?" "That's what I hear," Benson smirked. "Just waiting for things to kick off." "Around 10 o'clock, I asked, watching his reaction. "You seem to know a lot," he said, growing nervous. "Like I said, it's my job. I take it you like brunettes?" I added with a sleazy smile. "Love brunettes," he replied, relaxing. "Especially with long hair?" I pushed further. "Exactly," he grinned. "Like Mrs. Alpin, right?" "Just like her," I said, feeling sick as he laughed. I held back my anger. "You probably like them with no hair down there, huh?" "Bald is nice," he laughed again. That was enough. I got what I needed. "I've got to check around. If you need anything, find me," I said, walking away, muttering under my breath. When I returned to the other side of the room, a man had asked Kathy to dance. She politely declined and quickly pulled me onto the dance floor. As we danced, I kept an eye on Benson, making sure he didn't realize I was Kathy's husband. It was 9:30, and my stomach was in knots as I pieced together the final parts of the puzzle. As the song ended, I headed back to our table, but Kathy pulled me back onto the dance floor as the band started playing a slow song. She held me tighter than usual, almost uncomfortably so. I noticed Benson watching us, looking uneasy. I smiled and gave him a thumbs up, then tried to ignore him. I wondered if dancing with Kathy made him suspicious about who I really was, but by that point, I didn't care. After the dance, we returned to the table. As I sat down, Greg Bartlett approached, handed Kathy a small package, and whispered something to her before leaving. Kathy hid the package behind her back and told me she was going to the restroom. I looked at her and felt a wave of sickness. "Don't do it," I said firmly. "Don't do what?" she asked, pretending not to understand. "You know what I mean," I replied, grabbing her arm and locking eyes with her. "I'm not stupid. Stop it now." Kathy pulled away, insisting she was just going to the bathroom, and walked off without looking back. While she was gone, I pieced together everything I had observed. It started when Kathy began calling Hanson Jack, then her sudden depression and insistence that the national pharmaceutical deal was in jeopardy because of her, though she claimed she had done nothing wrong. The numerous meetings with Bartlett, Hansen, and the customer, along with her tracking of her menstrual cycle, didn't add up, especially since she was still on birth control. And the argument about shaving, that wasn't for me. What Kathy didn't know was that earlier, I had seen her unclothed in the living room, with Hansen's hand on her. I watched as he touched her and kissed her. I didn't confront them immediately. Instead, I opened the garage door, giving them time to stop and for Hansen to slip out. I suspected Benson had demanded Kathy shave for him as part of the deal, with Hansen and Bartlett complicit in the whole thing. I figured the package Bartlett handed her contained shaving cream and a razor, and she was now in the restroom preparing for Benson. It was 9:45, and Kathy hadn't returned. I was tense and running out of time. Without a clear plan, I decided to find Kathy and drag her out of the building. Consequences be damned. As I headed for the door, the band announced a break, and an idea hit me. I noticed Benson, Bartlett, and Hansen standing together by the bar, the perfect audience. I walked over to the band and asked the lead singer, "Can you leave your mic on?" "I'd like to make a few announcements." "Sure," he said, handing me the wireless mic. "It's ready to go." I paced for a moment, gathering my thoughts, then turned on the microphone. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" I called out. The room slowly quieted, and I noticed Kathy coming back from the restroom. Benson, Bartlett, and Hansen were all watching me, curious. "Thanks," I continued. "I just wanted to take a moment on this special occasion to share some news about me and my wonderful wife, Kathy." I glanced at Kathy, who was now walking toward me, looking fearful. "First, some great news. Kathy and I are going to have a baby," I announced. The crowd applauded, and Kathy covered her face, probably appearing embarrassed to those who didn't know the truth. Hansen looked furious, Bartlett confused, and Benson unreadable. And more good news, Kathy is getting a promotion tonight for her work on the national pharmaceutical deal. I understand she's meeting upstairs with Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Hansen, and Mr. Benson to sign the contract. Isn't that exciting? More applause followed, but Kathy quietly pleaded, "Oh, God, please stop." She sat down on the floor, visibly shaken. I pressed on, saying, "When I got home tonight, I found my wife in the bathroom getting ready to shave. And I don't mean her legs." There was awkward laughter, but the room was mostly silent now. Kathy was lying on the floor, crying, and people were watching in shock. Benson was gone, but Hansen's face was red with rage, and Bartlett was approaching me, clearly wanting to stop me. I continued. Kathy was shaving because she was supposed to be a gift for Mr. Benson tonight. He wanted her hairless. The crowd was stunned. Bartlett reached for the microphone, but I pulled it away, warning him, "Try that again, and I'll knock you out." I turned the mic back on. "One last thing for Bartlett and Hansen. I'll be suing this company for what you did to my marriage. I'm confident I'll win, and part of the settlement will be your firings. Good night, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your party." The room fell silent as I set the mic down and walked over to Kathy, who was still on the floor, tears streaming down her face. "Kathy," I whispered. She looked up at me. "Fred, I'm so—" "Kathy, don't say anything," I interrupted. "Do you think you'll still get that promotion now?" I stood up and looked around the room. People were staring, but when I glanced back, they quickly looked away. I gave Kathy one last look and left. As I was crossing the lobby to leave, Hansen blocked my path. "Do you know what you've done?" he demanded. "Yes," I said. "I screwed you in DCNH before you could finish screwing my wife. I hope it cost you millions, not just a few $100,000. "You'll pay for this," Hansen snapped. "I think you will," I replied. "I'll be talking to the SEC about your business practices." As I turned to leave, Hansen grabbed my arm. "I'm not done with you," he said. I brushed him off. "Touch me again, and you won't be walking out of here," I warned. I heard him muttering as I left. When I got home, I grabbed a bottle of scotch and started drinking. As I poured my second glass, I noticed something blue in a potted plant. It was the blue plastic case that had fallen out of the wastebasket earlier in the week. Inside, it was full, nothing missing. I put it on the table and kept drinking until I passed out on the sofa. I woke up around 9 a.m. Saturday with a pounding headache and a terrible taste in my mouth. After some coffee and breakfast, I showered. There was no sign of Kathy, and I didn't expect her to come home. She was probably either afraid to face me or angry that I had ruined things for her at DCNH. I wasn't sure if I cared. I sat on the sofa, thinking about what to do next. It hurt to realize how much I had loved Kathy and how she could betray us like this. I doubted I could ever forgive her, but I knew I needed to give her a chance to explain if she wanted it. However, I wouldn't chase her for an explanation. If she didn't feel the need to explain, I didn't need to hear it. I wondered where she spent the night and felt guilty for leaving her at the party. I should have brought her home, but at the time, I was too hurt and angry to care. At 11 o'clock, the phone rang. I assumed it was Kathy and debated answering, but I picked up on the sixth ring. "Mr. Alpin?" a voice asked. "Yes," I replied. "This is Special Agent Mark Walker with the FBI. Is your wife with you?" "No, she's not," I said, surprised the FBI wanted to talk to her. "Actually, I need to speak with you," he said. "Me? What about?" I asked, confused. "I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" I agreed and received directions to meet him at 2 p.m. After the call, I wondered what the FBI wanted with me. It might have something to do with one of my recent cases, but I couldn't figure out why he wouldn't explain over the phone. Over the years, I've had plenty of interactions with law enforcement for work, and it never bothered me. But this FBI meeting had me uneasy. At 1 o'clock, I dressed in jeans and a sweater, drove into town, and parked across from the FBI offices in downtown Indianapolis. I gave my name to the receptionist, telling her I was there to see Special Agent Walker. "Have a seat," she said. Within 2 minutes, Walker came out to greet me. Unlike the expensive suit he wore the night before, today he was in blue Dockers and a casual shirt. "Mr. Alpin, thanks for coming," he said. "Follow me." We entered a conference room, and he offered me a cup of coffee. After pouring 2 cups, he sat down across from me. "Should I call you Special Agent Walker or Mr. Benson?" I asked. "Mark is fine," he replied. "And may I call you Fred?" "Fred's fine," I agreed. "You must be confused right now," Mark said. "Yes, but I'm starting to piece it together. You were undercover as Mr. Benson, right?" "That's right," he confirmed. "I trust you'll keep what we discuss here confidential." "I understand confidentiality," I said, still unsure of his role. "I'm hoping you'll explain how my wife got caught up in all of this." "I'll tell you what I can without jeopardizing our investigation," Mark said. "But I get that you're angry. This situation has probably strained your marriage." I nodded, frustrated. "This mess has likely ended it." "Things might not be as bad as you think," Mark continued. "Let me fill you in." He explained that earlier in the year, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, contacted the FBI after receiving disturbing information about DCNH's business practices. "We began investigating and decided undercover work was necessary," he said. He paced as he spoke. "National Pharmaceutical was in talks with DCNH about a merger. Mr. Benson, the president of National, raised concerns about DCNH's tactics. Since no one at DCNH had met Benson in person, I took on his identity and began negotiating with them." "So you pretended to be Benson?" I asked. "Exactly," Mark confirmed. "I led Hansen and Bartlett to believe I was interested but hesitant. I made them think I might back out, which made them desperate." "But why involve my wife?" I asked, feeling a growing knot in my stomach. "That's not exactly what happened," Mark explained. "When I first met with Bartlett and Hansen at DCNH, I was introduced to your wife. I told Hansen I wanted to talk to her about the finances of the company they wanted to merge with." Why? I asked, bracing myself. Because your wife was the whistleblower. She contacted the SEC with concerns about DCNH's unethical practices. I was stunned. Kathy blew the whistle? Yes, but she didn't know I was FBI, Mark said. Her information implicated not just Bartlett and Hansen, but higher-ups, including the company's president. I couldn't fully trust her, though. So, she didn't know you were playing Benson? I asked, trying to make sense of it. Was she actually going to sleep with you at the party? I don't think so, Mark replied, shaking his head. But I can't be sure. When I hinted at backing out of the deal, Hansen asked what it would take to seal the contract. That's when he made the suggestion. My fists clenched. He offered my wife? Mark nodded. He said, I noticed you think Kathy Alpin is pretty attractive. How'd you like to get in on that? I was shocked. I expected him to offer a bribe, but instead, he offered your wife. I played along to see how far they'd go. I told him I might be interested, but didn't commit. That son of a witch, I muttered, anger rising. Exactly, Mark said. The more Hansen talked, the more excited he got. I felt like he wanted me to accept for reasons beyond closing the deal. He even suggested I meet your wife at the company Christmas party. I started to feel nauseous. So, were you going to go through with it? No, Mark quickly replied. I had no intention of sleeping with your wife. First, it would have been unethical. Second, I suspected there'd be cameras and mics in the room. This wasn't just a sexual favor to get me to sign. They planned to use it to blackmail me. How are you planning to get out of it? I asked, genuinely curious. I was going to back out at the last second, Mark explained. I'd say the timing wasn't right and suggest Mrs. Alpin meet me in my hotel room later. Once alone, I'd reveal who I really was and bring her in for questioning. The plan was to arrest Bartlett and Hansen today. We thought we had enough evidence. I sat back feeling a mix of relief and anger. But I ruined everything with my little speech, didn't I? Actually, Mark said, smiling slightly, you didn't. You saved me from the meeting with Hansen last night. I left with my cover intact and kept investigating. This morning, Hansen offered me a large cash bribe to sign the contract. I told him I'd meet him Monday morning. When he hands over the money, we'll arrest him, and DCNH's operations will be shut down as we investigate every deal from the past 3 years. I shook my head, still processing it all. I still don't know where Kathy fits into this. Your wife was trying to do the right thing by blowing the whistle on the company, Mark said. But as for her role in the offer, I think Hansen was coercing her. He might have been blackmailing her. Was a rubber ever mentioned? I asked, feeling another wave of nausea. Yes, Mark replied. Hansen said your wife insisted I use one. He joked, we wouldn't want to get her pregnant, would we? I sighed and leaned back in my chair. I need to find Kathy. I need to hear her side of this. She wasn't entirely innocent, but there were mitigating factors. That's all I can tell you for now, Mark said. Any more questions? Not at the moment. Good. Just remember, don't talk about the investigation yet. I'd suggest not telling your wife anything until we indict Bartlett and Hansen, which should be in a few days. We'll want to question her then. I agreed to keep quiet about the investigation. Mark said he'd call when I could talk to Kathy about the FBI sting. He also mentioned they'll likely want your testimony too. We shook hands and I left the building. When I got home, there was a message from Kathy asking me to call. I dialed the number she left, and a woman answered. Who's calling? She asked. Tell her it's her husband, I said. Kathy sounded nervous when she picked up. Where have you been? She asked. I've been calling all day. Not all day, I said. I was home until 1 o'clock. Oh, I guess I started calling around then. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. She needed to show she was ready to talk, so I stayed silent. Fred, can I come home? She asked. This is where you live, isn't it? You should be here now. I'll be there in an hour. Okay, I said, and hung up. It was already 5 o'clock. I decided to have dinner ready when she arrived so we could talk afterward. I started cooking, then went upstairs to prepare for the conversation I knew was coming. When I came back down, I grabbed the blue case from the coffee table and put it in my pocket. I made spaghetti and meatballs with a salad and opened a bottle of Chianti. Kathy walked in at 6:05 and dinner was ready. When she saw the dinner and wine, some of the stress seemed to leave her face. She realized things might not be as bad as she feared. At first, we didn't speak. We sat down to eat, and I poured the wine. After a few minutes of painful silence, I asked, "Where did you stay last night?" "One of my friends took me home after you left." I couldn't resist a jab. "Oh, you didn't stay for the rest of the party?" "You pretty much ended the party with your speech," she said. "I guess I owe some people an apology for that. But not you, and definitely not Bartlett or Hansen." "You're right. I owe you the apology," she said. She was about to continue, but I stopped her. "We'll talk after dinner," I said, and we both fell silent again. There wasn't much else to say. After dinner, Kathy started loading the dishwasher, but I stopped her. "You can clean up later. We need to talk now," I said. We moved to the family room and sat facing each other. "Do you want to tell me everything, or should I start asking questions?" "Either way, I expect the truth," I said. "I'll tell you everything," she said. "I'm sure you know when it started. The day after your Christmas party, Jack called me. He said a big deal with National Pharmaceutical was in trouble, and Mr. Benson wouldn't sign unless I slept with him. I was furious. I couldn't believe Jack would ask me to do something like that. But he said the deal was important to the company and that I'd be rewarded handsomely if I agreed. Lots of money and a promotion. I didn't want to do it, but Jack kept pressuring me, saying many people were counting on me. I told them I needed to think about it. I was so stressed and confused that I couldn't think straight. When you came home, I knew I couldn't go through with it. Jack and Mr. Bartlett kept after me all day Monday, trying to get me to agree. Mr. Hansen said if the deal fell through, it'd be my fault, and I'd be fired. They also threatened to fire me if I told anyone. I tried to tell you as much as I could, but I knew if you found out the full story, you'd do something crazy, and I'd lose my job. On Tuesday, I told them I wouldn't do it. They told me to reconsider. Then Mr. Hansen said the company was missing over $100,000. And if there were an audit, it would look like I'd been embezzling for years. Jack told me I'd go to jail unless I did what they wanted. He said if I cooperated, I'd get the money and the promotion. But if not, there'd be an audit, and I'd be charged with embezzlement. In the end, I had no choice but to agree. Jack and Mr. Bartlett talked to me daily, making sure I didn't back out. They kept saying I was doing the right thing, and that you'd understand if you knew how important the deal was, Kathy continued. I'd been quiet up to this point, but now I was furious. You can't seriously think I'd have been okay with this. You should have told me everything. I would have found a way out for you. I know, Kathy said, her voice shaking. Once I decided to go through with it, I felt a bit better, but I was so guilty about what I was doing to you. You have to understand. I was terrified of going to jail. I had to risk it. And then, I asked, my patience wearing thin. On Friday, Jack called me into his office. He said Mr. Benson wanted me to shave all my pubic hair before the party. I told him I couldn't do that, but he said it would be a deal breaker if I didn't. Mr. Benson would back out of the deal. Jack told me to shave before the party and not let you notice until later. If you got mad, I was just supposed to say sorry and that I'd let it grow back. The problem was, you came home earlier than expected and caught me getting ready to shave. So, was I right? Did you end up shaving in the ladies' room at the party? I asked, narrowing my eyes. Kathy looked down at her hands. Yes, she whispered. Mr. Bartlett sent someone to the store for a razor and shaving cream, and I shaved in the ladies' room. When I came back to the party, I saw you with the microphone, trying to get everyone's attention. I was terrified. I had no idea what you were going to do, and I didn't know how to stop you. When you said I was pregnant, I couldn't believe it. I didn't say you were pregnant, I corrected her. I said we were going to have a baby. You weren't pregnant yet, but that was our plan, wasn't it? Well, yes, she stammered. But what? I demanded. Are we, or aren't we going to start a family? Yes, we are, she said softly. I'll stop taking my birth control pills tomorrow, and then we can start. One more question, I said, holding back a flood of emotions. Did you tell Benson he had to use a rubber? Jack said he'd make sure Benson used one, she replied. I'm glad he did because I wasn't thinking straight with all the stress. Anyway, your speech basically ended my career at DCNH and probably eliminated the deal with National Pharmaceutical, she added bitterly. So let me get this straight. Bartlett and Hansen blackmailed you into agreeing to sleep with Benson to close a deal. They also insisted you fulfill his demand to shave, and I ruined everything by catching you in the act. Then, even after I told you not to do it, you shaved anyway. And in the end, the only reason you didn't sleep with Benson was because I ruined it with my speech. Does that about sum it up? Yes, she whispered. But I don't blame you. I understand why you did it. Oh, good, I said sarcastically. So, you forgive me for trying to stop my wife from sleeping with another man? That's not what I meant, Kathy said quickly. I know you had every right to react the way you did, and I have no right to be upset. I'm upset with myself. I should have told you everything from the start. Do you think you can ever forgive me? She asked, her voice breaking. That depends, I said, feeling the weight of everything. Is that everything? Have you told me everything I need to know? Yes, I've told you everything, she said, tears filling her eyes. I love you, and I can't stand the thought of losing you because of this mess I got into. Well, things don't look as bad as they did at first, I said, noticing a faint smile forming on her face. But I have a few more questions before we can move past this, okay? What questions? She asked, her voice hopeful. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the blue case, and tossed it on the coffee table. I found this in the trash last week, and it's full. You threw away all your birth control pills, but you didn't tell me, and you made me believe you were still taking them. Just 5 minutes ago, you said you'd stop taking them tomorrow. Can you explain that? Kathy looked like I'd slapped her. She opened and closed her mouth several times before finally speaking, but I knew she was lying. You're right. I stopped taking my pills, she admitted. I was planning to surprise you by getting pregnant. I know how much you wanted to start a family, so I thought it would be a nice surprise. That would have only worked if we had been having sex, I said coldly. But the last time we did was the day before you stopped taking them. I was just so upset about what Mr. Bartlett and Jack wanted me to do that I wasn't in the mood for sex, Kathy replied quickly. Were you aware that last night was the most fertile night of your cycle? I asked, catching her off guard. No, I didn't realize that, she stammered. I had too many other things on my mind. It's strange, I continued, that you planned to sleep with Benson last night, in the middle of your cycle, and didn't insist on a rubber. But Jack did. What are you implying? She asked, panic rising in her voice. That I knew I was fertile and was willing to risk getting pregnant? I would never do that. I could tell Kathy was shaken, and I was tired of the game. It was time to end it. One more question, Kathy, I said, looking straight at her. How long have you been sleeping with Hansen? Her face went pale, and all she could say was, What? No more lies, I said firmly. I know you've been tracking your menstrual cycle and marked last night as the day in your planner. I know Hansen told Benson to use a rubber, and since I wasn't sleeping with you, that leaves Hansen. He wanted to get you pregnant, didn't he? Kathy's tears started falling, and she didn't respond. It wasn't Benson who wanted you shaved. It was Hansen, I said coldly. And you did it for him, even though I told you not to. That shows me he has more influence over you than I do. I let the words sink in. Last night, when I came home, I stood at the front door and saw you unclothed in the living room. I watched as Hansen ran his hands down your back and kissed your stomach, like a man kisses the belly of the woman carrying his baby, or about to carry it. Did you really think I was dumb enough to believe it was mine? Or were you planning to leave me all along? Kathy's sobs grew louder as I stood up and left the room. When I came back to the kitchen with my suitcase, she looked at me in shock. No! Please don't leave me, she cried, rushing toward me. I love you. I don't love Jack. He blackmailed me. I had no choice but to do what he asked. Why didn't you just keep taking your birth control pills and lie to Jack? I asked bitterly. You had no problem lying to me. I think I'd believe anything you told that rat over what you've told me lately. Oh, by the way, I added as I reached the door, last night when I was watching you with Hanson, I heard you say, I love you to him. So, where does that leave me? I don't love him. If I'm pregnant, I'll have infanticide. I love you. Please, you have to believe me, she begged. No, I don't, I said coldly. And as for the baby, don't feticide it for my sake. Kathy collapsed on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. As I glanced back from the garage door, she looked just as she had the night before at the party, broken. I no longer felt any love for her, only disgust. I hated leaving the house we had worked so hard to build, but it didn't hold any fond memories. Fortunately, we hadn't been there long enough to make any. It's been over 2 years since I walked out on Kathy. After I left, I found a furnished apartment and tried to start over. That's when the nightmares began. I wasn't happy with my job anymore, so I quit and moved to California. After settling in, I started my own insurance investigation company. I called Bill Ripley and asked if he wanted to partner with me. 2 months later, he joined. When Bill arrived, he told me Mary Farrow, a mutual acquaintance, had heard we were starting our own business and asked if we had a job for her. Mary moved out here 14 months ago, and we started dating 2 months later. After 3 months, we moved in together. I was surprised at how quickly I could love again. I wasn't in a hurry to get married, but I liked having someone I cared about to share my life with. Through a few contacts, including Special Agent Mark Walker, I've kept tabs on people back in Indianapolis. It turns out Kathy blew the whistle on the company president and CEO, following Jack Hanson's instructions. Hanson hoped to get them fired for their shady deals so he could take over as president of DCNH. Apparently, Kathy wasn't lying when she said she didn't love him. She was playing him, knowing he was in love with her. She figured if Hanson got what he wanted, she'd get whatever she wanted. Hanson and his wife didn't have kids, which he blamed on her. After I left, he tried for over a month to get Kathy pregnant. He wasn't successful with her either. He was sterile. His wife found out about the affair and divorced him. A month later, Hanson was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for his actions at DCNH. Bartlett also got jail time. He's serving 2 years in a minimum security facility. Kathy was fired from DCNH. The company was reorganized and eventually bought out by a larger consulting firm. The last I heard, Kathy was teaching bookkeeping at a community college near Columbus, Ohio. I try not to think about her. The wounds are still too fresh to remember any good times we had. I don't miss her, which is good, because Mary more than fills the void Kathy left in my life. That's why I married her. Now, here I sit, looking down at Mary and wondering if I should wake her up, not to tell her I had the dream again, but to tell her I love her. Last night, she told me, whenever you decide you want a baby, just let me know. But make sure you order early. It takes 9 months for delivery, she added with a laugh. I'm thinking of placing that order tomorrow. By the way, in case you were wondering, yes, DCNH stands for Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I remember the first time I met Liz and Emily. Liz was still that bright, smiling woman back then, warm, full of life, with a laugh that would light up the room. I fell for her pretty quickly, to be honest. She had this way of making me feel like I was the luckiest man alive. Emily was just a little girl at the time, all of 6 years old, with these big brown eyes that always seemed to be sizing me up. When I proposed to Liz, I didn't just think about marrying her. I was also thinking about being a good husband and a father to Emily. I knew I wasn't her biological dad, but I was prepared to take on that responsibility. I thought maybe, given time, she'd see me as more than just some guy her mom was in love with. At first, things were all right. Liz was patient, understanding even, whenever Emily seemed standoffish. I figured it was just her adjusting to the idea of me being around. I did my best to earn Emily's trust. I'd fix her bike when it broke, taught her how to change a tire when she was old enough. I'd try to help her with her homework, even if she'd just give me these cold looks and say, "I'll wait for Mom." I tried not to take it personally, but it wore on me, you know? The way Emily would look past me, like I was a ghost in my own home. All that effort, trying to connect with her. It was like throwing pebbles into a bottomless well. I knew she missed her real dad, Billy, and I tried to be understanding of that. But it was hard when she talked about him like he was some sort of hero, even though he's been locked up for drug trafficking for as long as I've known them. Then there was Liz. At first, she'd tell me to give it time, to be patient with Emily. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Liz started to change. That warmth I fell in love with started to cool. The patience turned to criticism. Everything I did wasn't good enough. If I came home late from the shop, she'd accuse me of not caring about the family. If I tried to discipline Emily, even just to ask her to pick up after herself, Liz would jump down my throat for being too harsh. The nagging, it was like a slow drip that wore me down. At first, I thought it was just stress. We all have our moments. But it kept getting worse. She'd find a way to twist anything I said or did into something it wasn't. I'd come home exhausted from working overtime to put money into the house, but she'd just accuse me of trying to avoid spending time with them. There were days when I'd pull into the driveway and just sit in the car for a minute, trying to brace myself for whatever fight was coming next. And Emily, God, it felt like she was following Liz's lead. She became colder, more distant. Anytime I tried to talk to her, even just to ask how her day was, it felt like she was looking right through me. I know she writes letters to Billy, sends him pictures, talks about how she can't wait for him to get out. Liz encourages it, says it's good for her to stay connected to her father. But where does that leave me? I thought I could build a life with them, that we'd find a way to be a family. But now it feels like I'm just an outsider looking in. The worst part? I'm not even sure when it all went wrong. Maybe it was always this way, and I just didn't want to see it. But there are days I wonder how much more of this I can take. It all started over something small. It usually does. I came home from work, hands covered in grease, exhausted after another long day at the shop. The moment I stepped through the door, I saw Emily in the living room, sprawled out on the couch, her school books and snack wrappers scattered all over the coffee table. "Hey, Em," I called out, trying to keep my voice light. "How about you clean up this mess before your mom gets home?" She barely looked up from her phone. "Yeah, whatever." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. "I mean it, Emily. I've asked you before. It's not fair to leave everything for your mom to clean up." That got her attention. She rolled her eyes and finally looked at me, her expression hardening. "Seriously, Alistair? Why do you even care? You're not my dad. So stop pretending you are." That hit me like a punch to the gut, but I swallowed it down, trying to stay calm. "I'm not trying to replace your dad, Emily," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "But I am your stepfather, and I'm just asking you to do your part around here." She scoffed and stood up, crossing her arms. "You think just because you married my mom, you get to boss me around? Newsflash, I don't have to listen to you. You're just some guy she settled for because she couldn't do better." That one stung. I could feel my jaw tighten, but I tried to let it slide. I'd learned to pick my battles with her over the years, but today, after the kind of day I'd had, I wasn't in the mood to just take it. "Look, I'm not asking for much here. Just clean up after yourself. It's called respect, Emily." "Respect?" She let out a bitter laugh. "You don't get to talk to me about respect. If you respected me at all, you'd stay out of my life. I don't need you trying to act like you're some kind of dad. My real dad might be in jail, but at least he actually cares about me." I could feel my hands clenching into fists, not out of anger at her, but out of the sheer helplessness of the situation. I knew there was nothing I could say that would change how she saw me. "You think he cares about you?" I shot back, my voice rising despite myself. "Where is he, then?" "Huh. He's in a cell because he chose drugs over you. And I'm here, trying to make sure you have a stable life." "But sure, yeah, I'm the bad guy." Her eyes flashed with rage, and for a second, I thought she might throw something at me. "You think I'd choose you over him? Never. He's my dad, no matter what. And nothing you do is ever going to change that." I just stood there, staring at her, feeling like everything I tried to build with her over the past 8 years was crumbling right in front of me. "Fine," I muttered under my breath. "You don't want me in your life?" Message received. I turned on my heel and stormed out the door, the sound of her laughter following me. I walked out into the cold evening air, grumbling under my breath, wishing there was a way to get through to her. But maybe she was right. Maybe I was just fooling myself thinking I could ever be more than just her mom's husband. It all went to hell. I never saw it coming. One moment, I was driving back from the hardware store, thinking about what groceries I needed to pick up, and the next, everything went black. I woke up days later in a sterile hospital room, with machines beeping and tubes stuck into my arms. I tried to move, but a searing pain shot through my legs. The doctor explained it all to me, his voice calm and clinical, like he was talking about someone else entirely. Multiple fractures, torn ligaments. It would take months of physical therapy just to stand on my own 2 feet again. I'd lost my job, but the company agreed to pay out some damages, so I guess that was something. But through all of it, 2 weeks of hell in that hospital. I kept waiting for Liz to walk through that door. For Emily, even, to at least show up, if only to pretend to care. But the only one who came every day was my mother, Martha. God bless her. She sat by my side, made sure I ate, helped the nurses change my bandages when they were short-staffed. Liz never showed. Not once. When they finally discharged me, I was excited to go home, even if the thought of climbing those front steps with my busted legs made me cringe. But that excitement didn't last long. As soon as I opened the door, there she was, Liz, standing in the living room with a look on her face that was more annoyed than relieved. "What's going on, Liz?" I asked, my voice weak, barely above a whisper. She crossed her arms over her chest and looked at me like I was some stranger off the street. "Alistair, I think it's best if you don't come back here. I've already filed for divorce. You'll be getting the papers soon." I just stood there, leaning on my crutches, trying to process her words. "Divorce? Are you serious right now? After everything?" "Yes, Alistair. I'm serious," she snapped, her voice sharp like a knife. "I can't deal with this anymore. You're not the man I married. And now, with you being like this," she gestured vaguely to my leg braces, "it's just too much. I need someone who can actually take care of things, not someone who's going to be a burden." A burden. That's what I had become in her eyes. Not her husband, not the man who tried his damnedest to be a father to her daughter, but just dead weight to be cast aside. "Liz, I started, but I could barely get the words out. What was there to say? My world was crumbling, and she was already kicking me while I was down. "Just go, Alistair," she said, her voice cold and final. "You can't stay here. I've already changed the locks." I turned to look at Emily, who was standing in the corner, her arms folded, watching it all with that same indifferent look she always had. She didn't say a word, didn't even flinch as I struggled to turn back toward the door. My mother, bless her heart, was waiting in the car. She came in when she saw me struggling, took one look at Liz, and something dark and angry flickered in her eyes. "You're really going to do this?" Mom asked Liz, her voice low and steady. "You're throwing him out when he can barely walk?" Liz didn't even hesitate. "Yes, I am. It's what's best for all of us." Mom shook her head slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll regret this, Liz. Mark my words. You're throwing away the best thing you ever had. And one day, you'll realize that, when it's far too late." Liz just rolled her eyes, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty pass over her face. Mom helped me into the car, her touch gentle but firm. "We'll get you through this," she whispered to me, her voice cracking. "You're coming home with me." As we drove away, I couldn't help but look back at that house. The house I poured years of my life into, hoping it would become a home for all of us. Now, it was just another place that didn't want me anymore. And as we pulled onto the highway, leaving that life behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man I was before that accident was gone forever. All that was left now was a broken shell, trying to figure out where the hell I go from here. 3 months later, I sat in the courtroom, gripping the handles of my crutches as I tried to steady my nerves. My legs were still shaky, the dull ache a constant reminder of the accident that changed everything. Mom sat next to me, her hand on my shoulder, giving me silent strength. Across the aisle, there was Liz, looking as put together as ever in a crisp blouse and her hair perfectly styled. But this time, she wasn't alone. Standing next to her was Hank, fresh out of prison, dressed like he was attending some casual brunch instead of a court hearing that was about to decide my future. The sight of him made my blood boil. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to bring that man here. The judge, an older man with a stern expression, shuffled through the papers in front of him before looking up at Liz. His eyes were sharp, assessing. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, his voice echoing in the silent room, "I've reviewed the details of this case and frankly, I am appalled by the timing of your divorce filing." Liz blinked, clearly taken aback. "Your Honor, No." He cut her off, raising a hand. "You don't get to justify this. Your husband here, he gestured towards me, just came out of a hospital after a life-altering accident. He's disabled, out of work, and yet, instead of supporting him through his recovery, you filed for divorce and effectively threw him out on the streets. Do you have any idea how callous that appears? Liz's face flushed. She tried to regain her composure, her eyes flicking nervously toward Hank, who just shrugged like he couldn't care less. Your Honor, it's just, things were not working out between us. It was best for both of us to move on. The judge's eyebrows shot up. Move on? You left your disabled husband with nowhere to go, Mrs. Thompson, and you say this was best for both of you? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a cold tone. I would have expected a bit more compassion. I watched Liz squirm, but I kept my mouth shut. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Furthermore, the judge continued, flipping through another set of papers. I see that you've been living in a house that belongs to Mr. Thompson's mother, not you? He glanced over at Martha, who nodded. Which means, Mrs. Thompson, you and your daughter will need to vacate the premises immediately. Liz's eyes widened. What? That can't be right. We've been living there for years. That's my home. Your home? The judge shot back, his eyes narrowing. I don't think so. Legally, it belongs to Mrs. Martha Thompson here, who has every right to ask you to leave, which she has already asked in a petition here. Hank muttered something under his breath, clearly annoyed, but Liz quickly tried to smooth things over. Your Honor, surely we can work something out. The judge wasn't having any of it. No, Mrs. Thompson. You will vacate that property by the end of the week, or you will face legal consequences. And one more thing, he added, looking down at yet another document. Given Mr. Thompson's current condition, unemployed and unable to work due to his injuries, it is only fair that you provide him with alimony. Liz's face went pale. Alimony? But he's the one who... The judge cut her off again, his voice steely. Your daughter, Emily, legally she is not the daughter of Mr. Thompson? So, no child support is required here. I glanced at Mom, who gave me a small, triumphant smile. This wasn't just justice. It was a reckoning for all the ways Liz had tried to kick me when I was down. Liz looked like she was going to faint. But, Your Honor, this is unfair. Unfair? The judge replied with a sarcastic laugh. I think you'll find that life is rarely fair, Mrs. Thompson. You had a chance to do the right thing, and you chose otherwise. Now, you will live with the consequences. As the judge banged his gavel, signaling the end of the proceedings, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and vindication. Liz, red-faced and seething, stormed out of the courtroom with Hank trailing behind her like a lost puppy. For once, she couldn't manipulate her way out of this mess. Mom turned to me, squeezing my hand gently. I told you, son. They'd regret crossing you. I nodded, feeling the weight lift off my chest. Yeah, Ma. You were right. I wasn't whole yet, not by a long shot, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally standing on solid ground, even if I still needed crutches to do it. 2 days. That's all it took for Liz to hit rock bottom after the court verdict. I should have known she wouldn't go down quietly. But even with all the years I spent with her, I never imagined she would sink to this. It was late, maybe past midnight, and I was in my old childhood bedroom at my mother's place. My legs were still wrapped in braces, and getting up on my own was a struggle. The house was dead quiet except for the hum of the old fridge and the occasional creak of the floorboards as Mom moved around downstairs. She was always up late these days, making sure everything was locked up tight. I thought it was just her being overprotective after everything that happened. Turns out, she had a damn good reason to be on edge. A loud crash came from the back of the house, jolting me awake. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But then I heard Mom's voice, sharp and commanding, like she used to sound when I was a kid and I'd pushed her too far. Stop right there. Don't take another step, or I swear to God I'll put you down. There was shouting, a man's voice, deep and angry, followed by the sound of a scuffle. It didn't take long for me to recognize who it was. Hank. That lowlife had the audacity to come to my mother's house. I reached for my crutches, struggling to get myself upright, but I was still too slow. The next sound I heard made my blood run cold. The deafening roar of a shotgun blast. I couldn't move fast enough, couldn't get down those damn stairs, so I just gripped the banister and listened, my heart hammering in my chest. Liz, don't do it. I heard Mom yell, her voice carrying through the walls. There was another loud bang, and then silence. When I finally hobbled my way down to the living room, the scene that greeted me was like something out of a nightmare. Hank was lying on the floor, blood pooling around him, his eyes wide open but lifeless. Liz was slumped against the wall, clutching her side, gasping for breath. And in the middle of it all stood my mother, Martha, her old shotgun smoking, her eyes cold and steady. "Ma, what the hell?" I stammered, trying to process what I was seeing. Mom turned to me, her face hard as stone, but her hands were steady. "They broke in, Alistair. They were coming for us." Liz was groaning, barely conscious, but still alive. I stared at her, my mind reeling. "Liz, why?" I managed to choke out. "You've already taken everything. What more could you possibly want?" She looked up at me, her face twisted with rage, even through the pain. "You think you won?" she spat, blood bubbling at the corner of her mouth. "This was never about you, Alistair. It was about what we deserved. That house. All of it should have been ours. Hank and I. We were going to make sure of it." Martha stepped forward, her shotgun still aimed squarely at Liz, but she didn't pull the trigger again. "You two thought you could come into my home and take what's mine," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You clearly didn't know who you were dealing with." I glanced at Mom, confused. "How did you?" She gave me a grim smile, not taking her eyes off Liz. "I never told you everything about my past, son. Before I was your mother, I was a cop. And not a desk jockey, either. I've seen my share of crooks like them." She nudged Hank's lifeless body with her boot, her lip curling in disgust. The police arrived soon after, sirens blaring as they tore up the gravel driveway. Liz was taken away on a stretcher, barely clinging to life. As they loaded her into the ambulance, she looked at me one last time with pure hatred in her eyes. "You think this is over, Alistair?" she hissed. "I'll make you pay for this." I didn't bother responding. What was left to say? She'd already lost everything, and now she was facing the possibility of spending the rest of her life behind bars. Later, after the police had taken their statements and Hank's body was removed, Mom and I sat in the living room, the old shotgun leaning against the wall. She poured us both a stiff drink, her hands finally shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "Ma, you saved my life," I said, still trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. She gave a tired smile, taking a long sip of her whiskey. "I'll always protect you, Alistair, even if it means picking up an old habit." I looked at her, this woman who I thought I knew so well, and realized that maybe I never really understood just how strong she truly was. As broken as I felt, as lost as everything seemed, at least I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone in this fight. Not as long as Mom was around. 2 weeks later, Emily showed up on my doorstep like a stray cat looking for scraps. It had only been a few days since everything went down, since her mother and that lowlife Hank tried to finish me off in my own home. I still couldn't walk properly without my crutches, but I was slowly gaining strength back, thanks to Mom's relentless care. When I opened the door, there she was, Emily, standing there with that familiar defiant glare in her eyes. The same look she used to give me every time I tried to be anything resembling a father to her. I wasn't sure what she wanted, but I knew it wasn't going to be an apology. "Emily," I said flatly, "what are you doing here?" She crossed her arms, her chin jutting out. "I need money," she said without a shred of hesitation. "For school and everything else. You're still supposed to take care of me. That's what you promised, Mom." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I leaned heavily on my crutch, shaking my head in disbelief. "You've got some nerve showing up here after everything that happened." Her eyes flashed, anger rising. "This is your responsibility, Alistair. You married my mom. That means you're supposed to take care of me. I'm still your daughter." "Daughter?" I spat, my voice rising. "You made it clear a long time ago that I was never your father. Remember that? You're not my dad. You'll never be my dad." I mimicked, throwing her own words back at her. "You don't get to pick and choose when it's convenient to call me that." She flinched, but her resolve didn't crack. "Look, I need help, all right? Mom's in the hospital and Hank's, well, you know. It's just me now." "Yeah, I know. And I also know I don't owe you a damn thing." I turned, grabbing the map I'd been holding on to just in case she pulled something like this. "Here," I said, shoving it into her hands. "Why don't you take this and go find someone who actually cares?" She unfolded the map, confusion twisting her face. "What's this?" "That," I said coldly, "is a map to your grandma's house. Liz's mother or Hank's family. You remember them, right? The people who actually have a responsibility toward you. Go find them, Emily." "Because I'm done." Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. For years, I tried to be there for her, tried to make her part of a family that never wanted me. All those times she shut me out, All the sneering comments, the cold shoulders. Now she was desperate, and suddenly I was good enough? No, not anymore. Please, Alistair, she said, her voice breaking now. I don't have anywhere else to go. I let out a long, tired sigh. You told me to back off, remember? That I was nothing to you. Well, you got your wish. I'm not your father, Emily. I never was, and I'm done pretending. I turned my back on her, hobbling back inside. Go find your real family, I called over my shoulder. Because this door is closed. I heard her sob once, a choked sound that almost made me turn back. Almost. But I kept walking. I'd given enough of myself to that girl, to Liz, to all their drama. I was done being their punching bag. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in years, it actually felt like I was free. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hello, and welcome to Cheating Tales Lab. We're thrilled you could join us. We've got an exciting story to tell, and we hope it brings all the drama you're here for. Let's jump into it. Patrick Elliott sneezed as he shifted another box in his late father's storage unit. Dust billowed, catching the weak light filtering through the windows. He paused, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. His eyes fell on an ornate wooden box tucked away in a shadowy corner. What's this? He muttered, reaching for it. His fingers traced the intricate carvings, feeling the weight of history in his hands. The latch clicked open with surprising ease. Inside, a single document lay neatly folded. Patrick's brow furrowed as he unfolded it, squinting in the dim light. His eyes widened, then narrowed as he read. What the hell? It was a will. His will. With his signature, clear as day at the bottom. The document declared he'd been dead for 3 months, leaving everything to his wife Christine and a man named Lorenzo McCullough. Patrick's mind raced. How did his signature get there? Who was Lorenzo McCullough? And Christine? His stomach churned at the implications. With shaking hands, he pulled out his phone and carefully photographed the forged will. He replaced it in the box, positioning it exactly as he'd found it. As he locked up the storage unit, his heart pounded so loudly he was sure anyone passing by would hear it. The drive home was a blur. Patrick's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his thoughts a chaotic whirlwind. He pulled into the driveway of their suburban home, its perfectly manicured lawn and cheerful flower beds now seeming like a mockery. He found Christine in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The harsh fluorescent lights glinted off the knife in her hand. She looked up, a smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. You're home early, she said, her voice light and casual. Patrick's jaw clenched. He pulled out his phone, sliding it across the counter with the photo of the forged will displayed. Care to explain this, Christine? Her eyes widened for a moment before narrowing. She set down the knife, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. It's easier if you don't fight, Patrick. You'll regret everything if you do. Who's Lorenzo McCullough? Patrick demanded, his voice low and controlled despite the rage building inside him. Christine's smirk grew. That's none of your concern. None of my concern? Patrick's voice rose. My name is on a forged will leaving everything I own to you, and this man I've never heard of. How is that not my concern? Christine's demeanor shifted, her hostility becoming more apparent. Drop it, Patrick. You have no idea what you're getting into. No, I don't, Patrick agreed, his tone icy. So why don't you enlighten me? Christine's eyes flashed dangerously. You want to play this game? Fine. How about I enlighten your department head about your affair with that graduate student last year? Patrick's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Oh, don't play dumb, Christine sneered. I have emails, hotel receipts. It would be such a shame if your perfect reputation was tarnished. I wonder how quickly they'd fire you. Patrick's mind raced. There was no affair, no graduate student, but he realized with growing horror how easily Christine could fabricate evidence, how she could twist innocent interactions into something sinister. You're bluffing, he said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Christine's smile was predatory. Are you willing to bet your career on that? The full weight of her betrayal hit Patrick like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money or a forged will. This was about control, about dismantling his entire life. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Christine shrugged, picking up the knife again. Because I can. Because you're boring, Patrick. Predictable. I want more, and Lorenzo can give me that. You won't get away with this, Patrick said. Christine's laugh was cold and mirthless. I already have. This is your final warning, Patrick. Back off, or I'll destroy everything you've worked for. She stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Patrick alone with the weight of her threats hanging in the air. For a moment, he stood there, stunned. Then, survival instinct kicked in. He knew he couldn't stay in this house, not with Christine. Not when she held so many unknown cards. Moving quietly but quickly, Patrick went to their bedroom. He packed a bag with essentials, clothes, toiletries, his passport. In his study, he gathered critical documents, birth certificate, social security card, bank statements. He downloaded financial records and emails from their shared computer, copying them onto a flash drive. As he worked, he called his friend and lawyer, Theodore Myers. The call went to voicemail. Ted, it's Patrick. I need your help. It's urgent. Call me as soon as you get this. He kept the message vague, aware that Christine might access his phone records. Patrick paused in the study, a thought occurring to him. He set up a hidden camera, positioning it to capture most of the room. If Christine or this Lorenzo character came snooping, he'd have evidence. He heard the shower start upstairs. It was now or never. Patrick slipped out of the house, tossing his packed bag into the trunk of his car. As he pulled out of the driveway, he caught a glimpse of Christine in the upstairs window, wrapped in a towel, her face twisted in fury. He drove, no clear destination in mind, just the burning need to put distance between himself and the life he thought he knew. His mind whirled with plans, with questions, with the beginnings of a strategy to fight back. As the familiar streets of his neighborhood faded in the rearview mirror, Patrick felt a determination settle over him. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a war he intended to win. Patrick pulled into a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of town. He paid cash for a week's stay, using a false name. The room was dingy and smelled of stale cigarettes, but it would do for now. He sat on the edge of the bed, head in his hands, trying to process the events of the day. His phone buzzed, a text from Christine. Where are you? He ignored it, instead pulling out his laptop. He needed to start piecing together what was happening. Who was Lorenzo McCullough? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, how was he going to fight back? Patrick opened his email, scanning through months of correspondence. Nothing stood out at first, but then he noticed a pattern. Small discrepancies in their joint account, money moving that he couldn't account for. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Christine. You're making a mistake, Patrick. Come home and we can talk about this. He scoffed, typing out a reply before thinking better of it and deleting it. No, he wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a response. Not yet. Instead, he called his department head, Dr. Saul Godfrey. Patrick? Is everything all right? It's rather late, Saul answered, his voice groggy. I'm sorry to disturb you, Saul, Patrick said, trying to keep his voice steady. I need to take a leave of absence. Family emergency. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Of course, Patrick. Take all the time you need. Is there anything I can do? Patrick hesitated. Should he tell Saul about Christine's threats? No, not yet. He needed more information first. No, thank you. I'll keep you updated. After hanging up, Patrick turned back to his laptop. He started a new document, typing out everything he knew so far. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As the first rays of dawn crept through the motel windows, Patrick finally allowed himself to close his eyes. But sleep didn't come easily. His dreams were filled with shadowy figures and betrayal, Christine's laughter echoing in the background. He woke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and with them, a renewed determination. Patrick showered and changed, then headed out. He needed coffee and a plan. As he sat in a small diner, nursing a cup of bitter coffee, he made a list of his next steps. 1. Find out who Lorenzo McCullough is. 2. Gather evidence of the financial discrepancies. 3. Consult with Ted about legal options. 4. Secure his position at the university. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Ted returning his call. Patrick? What's going on? Your message sounded urgent. Patrick took a deep breath. Ted, I need your help. It's Christine. She's trying to steal everything from me. There's a forged will, threats to my career. I don't know what to do. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Christ, Patrick. Okay, where are you? We need to talk face to face. Patrick hesitated. Could he trust Ted? He'd known him for years, but then again, he'd thought he knew Christine too. I'd rather not say right now. Can we meet somewhere neutral? The coffee shop on 5th and Main? Sure, Patrick. I'll be there in an hour. As Patrick waited for Ted, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time the bell above the door jingled, he tensed, half expecting to see Christine or the mysterious Lorenzo walk in. Finally, Ted arrived, looking worried. Patrick, what the hell is going on? Patrick took a deep breath and began to explain everything. The forged will, Christine's threats, the mysterious Lorenzo McCullough. Ted listened intently, his frown deepening with each new revelation. This is serious, Patrick, Ted said when Patrick finished. We need to move quickly. First things first, we need to secure your assets. I'll file for an emergency injunction to freeze your joint accounts. Then we need to start building a case. Patrick nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time since discovering the will. What about Christine's threats to my career? Ted's expression hardened. Empty threats. We'll deal with them if she actually tries anything. For now, focus on gathering evidence. Document everything. And Patrick, be careful. If Christine is capable of this, there's no telling what else she might do. As they parted ways, Patrick felt a mix of emotions. Fear, anger, determination. But most of all, he felt a fierce resolve. Christine and Lorenzo had picked the wrong man to mess with. He would fight back, and he would win. Patrick Elliott pulled into the parking lot of a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered weakly, half its letters burned out. He paid cash for a week's stay, using a false name. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation, but it would do. He sat on the edge of the bed, laptop balanced on his knees. Time to start digging. Who the hell was Lorenzo McCullough? A quick search turned up more than Patrick expected. Lorenzo McCullough, charismatic real estate developer. Handsome bastard, too, with a smile that probably made middle-aged housewives swoon. Patrick's jaw clenched as he scrolled through articles and press releases. But there was something off about McCullough's success. Properties that seemed to materialize out of thin air. Deals that closed suspiciously fast. Patrick dug deeper, his archaeologist's instinct for uncovering buried secrets kicking in. It took hours of sifting through public records and newspaper archives, but a pattern emerged. Lorenzo had a type, wealthy women, usually married. He'd sweep in, charm them, and somehow end up with their money. The women were left broke and humiliated. Son of a bitch, Patrick muttered. He pulled up his own bank records next. There it was, a series of large transfers from their joint account to a company he didn't recognize. A quick search confirmed his suspicion. It was one of Lorenzo's shell companies. Patrick's hands shook with rage as he opened his email. He had to know how deep this went. How long had Christine been betraying him? The answer made him sick. Months of correspondence between Christine and Lorenzo, hidden in a secret folder. They discussed their plan in nauseating detail, how to manipulate Patrick, how to siphon off his money, how to leave him with nothing. Patrick slammed the laptop shut, while rising in his throat. He'd been a fool, blind to what was happening right under his nose. But no more. He was going to fight back, and he was going to win. He reached for his phone, dialing Theodore Myers. Ted? It's Patrick. We need to talk. I've found something. Across town, Christine paced in Lorenzo's sleek downtown apartment. He's gone. Packed a bag and disappeared. Lorenzo lounged on the leather sofa, looking unconcerned. Relax, darling. Where's he going to go? Christine glared at him. You don't know Patrick. He's not as stupid as you think. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. Watch your tone. Remember who got you out of that boring life? Christine bit back a retort. She'd made her choice, for better or worse. We need to move faster. Before he figures out what's really going on, Lorenzo stood, pulling her close. Don't worry your pretty little head. I've dealt with his type before. By the time he realizes what's happening, it'll be too late. Patrick met Ted at a quiet coffee shop the next morning. The lawyer listened in growing disbelief as Patrick laid out what he discovered. Jesus, Patrick, this is bigger than I thought. We need to build an airtight case. Patrick nodded. I'm not stopping until I take them both down. What's our next move? Ted leaned in. We need more allies. People who can vouch for your character, protect your interests. Who can we trust? Patrick thought for a moment. Dr. Saul Godfrey, my department head. He's always had my back. And there's a former student of mine, Trevor Joseph. He's a private investigator now. Ted nodded approvingly. Good. I'll start building the legal case. You reach out to them. And Patrick, be careful. These people are dangerous. Patrick's next stop was the university. He found Dr. Godfrey in his office, surrounded by stacks of papers and ancient artifacts. Patrick, come in, come in. How's that family emergency? Patrick closed the door behind him. Saul, I need your help. It's worse than I thought. He laid out the situation. The forged will, Christine's betrayal, Lorenzo's scheme. Saul listened in stunned silence. My God, Patrick, what can I do? I need you to protect my position here. Christine's threatened to ruin my career with false accusations. I can't lose everything I've worked for. Saul's face hardened. Not on my watch. You're one of our best, Patrick. I'll make sure the board knows it. Take whatever time you need to sort this out. Relief washed over Patrick. Thank you, Saul. I won't forget this. His next call was to Trevor Joseph. The young man answered on the second ring. Professor Elliot? This is unexpected. Trevor, I have a job for you. It's complicated, and it's personal. Are you interested? There was a pause on the other end of the line. For you, Professor? Absolutely. What do you need? Patrick explained the situation. Trevor let out a low whistle. That's one hell of a mess, Professor. But don't worry. I'm on it. I'll start digging into Lorenzo's background, see what skeletons I can find. With his team assembled, Patrick felt a surge of hope. He wasn't alone in this fight. His final call was to his sister, Charlotte. She answered with her usual cheerful tone, but it quickly turned to concern as Patrick spoke. Oh, Pat, I'm so sorry. Of course you can stay with me. As long as you need. Patrick's voice caught. Thanks, Char. I don't know what I'd do without you. That evening, they gathered at Charlotte's house. Patrick, Ted, Saul, Trevor, and Charlotte. The dining room table was covered in papers, laptops open to various documents. Ted took charge. All right, let's build this case. Trevor, what have you found on Lorenzo? Trevor grinned. Oh, you're going to love this. Our boy Lorenzo has quite the history. I've uncovered at least 3 other cases of him seducing wealthy women and swindling them. He's good at covering his tracks, but not good enough. Patrick leaned forward. Can we use this in court? Ted nodded. Absolutely. It establishes a pattern of behavior. What else? Saul spoke up. I've secured Patrick's position at the university. Any attempts to discredit him will be met with fierce resistance. Charlotte squeezed Patrick's hand. And you've got a safe place to stay as long as you need it. Patrick looked around at his allies, feeling a surge of gratitude. Thank you. All of you. I couldn't do this alone. Ted cleared his throat. Now, we need to be smart about this. Patrick, you need to lay low. Let us do the legwork. The less Christine and Lorenzo know about what we're doing, the better. Patrick nodded reluctantly. He hated feeling helpless, but he knew Ted was right. As the meeting broke up, Patrick pulled Trevor aside. There's one more thing. I need you to keep an eye on Lorenzo's office. If you can plant a listening device, even better. Trevor raised an eyebrow. That's walking a fine legal line, Professor. Patrick's face hardened. I don't care. I need to know what they're planning. Trevor studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. I'll see what I can do. Days passed. Patrick threw himself into the investigation, poring over financial records and emails. He barely slept, fueled by a burning need for justice. It was nearly midnight when Trevor called. Professor, I'm outside Lorenzo's office. The cleaning crew just left. If I'm going to plant that bug, now's the time. Patrick's heart raced. Do it. But be careful. He paced Charlotte's guest room, waiting for Trevor to call back. An hour passed. Then 2. Just as he was about to call Trevor, his phone buzzed. Trevor? What happened? Professor, you're not going to believe this. I almost got caught. Lorenzo and Christine showed up just as I was finishing. Patrick's blood ran cold. Are you all right? Did they see you? No, I hid in a supply closet. But Professor, I overheard them talking. They're planning to have you committed. They're going to claim you're having a mental breakdown. Patrick's mind raced. This was worse than he'd imagined. Did you get the bug planted? Yeah, it's in place. But Professor, there's something else. In my haste to get out, I think I left something behind. A pin. It has the university logo on it. Patrick cursed under his breath. All right, get out of there. We'll deal with this in the morning. He hung up, his mind whirling. They were trying to have him committed. It was a clever move. If they succeeded, everything he said would be dismissed as the ravings of a madman. He had to move fast. But as he reached for his laptop, a wave of exhaustion hit him. When was the last time he'd slept? He couldn't remember. Patrick sank onto the bed, closing his eyes for just a moment. He'd rest for a few minutes, then get back to work. He woke with a start, sunlight streaming through the windows. His phone was buzzing insistently. Hello, he answered groggily. Patrick, it's Ted. We've got a problem. Christine's lawyers have filed a petition for emergency guardianship. They're claiming you're mentally incompetent. Patrick sat up, fully awake now. On what grounds? They're saying you've been exhibiting erratic behavior, making wild accusations. They've got statements from your neighbors about you leaving suddenly in the middle of the night. Patrick's mind raced. That's when I left after confronting Christine. Damn it. Ted's voice was grim. This is serious, Patrick. If they succeed, you'll lose control of everything. Your assets, your decision-making power, everything. What do? We fight back. Hard. I'm filing counter motions now. We need to show you're of sound mind. That means you need to be visible. Patrick, go to work. Act normal. Don't give them any ammunition. Patrick nodded, even though Ted couldn't see him. Understood. Thanks, Ted. He hung up. Christine and Lorenzo had underestimated him. They thought he'd run, hide, act irrationally. Instead, he'd face this head-on. As he dressed for work, Patrick caught sight of himself in the mirror. He looked tired, drawn, but his eyes burned with determination. He wasn't going to let them win. Not now, not ever. Patrick Elliott sat in Dr. Saul Godfrey's office, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the armrest. The plan was in motion, but everything hinged on Lorenzo taking the bait. Are you sure this will work? Saul asked, worry lines creasing his forehead. Patrick's jaw clenched. It has to. We're out of options. The phone on Saul's desk rang, making them both jump. Saul answered, his eyes widening as he listened. It's for you, he said, handing the phone to Patrick. It's Lorenzo McCullough. Patrick took a deep breath, steeling himself. Mr. McCullough, what a pleasant surprise. Lorenzo's voice oozed charm. Dr. Elliott, I hope I'm not interrupting. I've got a business proposition I think you'll find very interesting. Patrick's free hand clenched into a fist, but his voice remained steady. I'm all ears. I understand you've made quite the archaeological discovery. I'd love to discuss some development opportunities. Perhaps over dinner? Patrick forced a laugh. Why wait? I'm free now if you are. The faculty lounge is private, and I'm sure you'd appreciate the discretion. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Certainly. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Patrick hung up, meeting Saul's concerned gaze. It's on. You know what to do. Saul nodded, reaching for his phone to set the rest of the plan in motion. 20 minutes later, Patrick sat in the faculty lounge, a hidden microphone taped to his chest. The door opened, and Lorenzo McCullough strode in, all gleaming teeth and expensive suit. Dr. Elliott, a pleasure to finally meet you. Lorenzo's handshake was firm, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Patrick gestured to a chair. Please, sit. I'm curious to hear about these development opportunities. Lorenzo leaned forward, his voice low and conspiratorial. Let's cut to the chase, shall we? I know about the Etruscan artifacts you've uncovered. Priceless, I'm sure. But think of the potential if that land were repurposed. Patrick raised an eyebrow. Repurposed? A luxury resort. Condos. Golf course. The possibilities are endless. Lorenzo's eyes gleamed with greed. Of course, such a project would require creative solutions to certain regulations. Creative solutions? Patrick prompted, his hand casually adjusting his tie, ensuring the microphone picked up every word. Lorenzo chuckled. Come now, Dr. Elliot. We're both men of the world. For the right price, any obstacle can be overcome. Permits expedited, inspections passed, artifacts relocated. Patrick leaned back, his face carefully neutral. And what would my role be in this venture? Your expertise would be invaluable. And of course, your silence. In return, you'd be handsomely compensated. Lorenzo pulled out a piece of paper, sliding it across the table. I've taken the liberty of drafting some preliminary figures. Patrick glanced at the paper, his eyebrows rising at the number of zeros. This is substantial. Lorenzo's smile widened. Consider it a down payment. There's much more where that came from. Patrick stood, pacing the room. It's certainly an intriguing offer, but I have to ask, Mr. McCullough, how can I trust you? After all, I've heard some unsavory rumors about your business practices. Lorenzo's smile faltered for a moment before returning full force. Rumors are just that, Dr. Elliot. Jealous competitors spreading lies. I assure you, my business dealings are entirely above board. Patrick turned, facing Lorenzo. Really? So if I were to look into your past projects, I wouldn't find any irregularities? No swindled investors? No mysteriously vanishing funds? The color drained from Lorenzo's face. What are you implying? Patrick's voice hardened. I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that I know exactly who you are and what you've done. To those other women. To my wife. To me. Lorenzo stood abruptly, his charm evaporating. You have no proof. Patrick smiled coldly. Don't I? This entire conversation has been recorded, Lorenzo. Your offer to bribe me, your admission of planning to violate regulations. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Lorenzo lunged forward, grabbing Patrick by the shirt. You son of a bitch. I'll destroy you. The door burst open. Ted Myers walked in, followed by 2 police officers. Lorenzo McCullough, you're under arrest for attempted bribery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and a host of other charges will be adding as we dig deeper. As the officers handcuffed Lorenzo, Patrick straightened his shirt. Oh, and Lorenzo? You might want to call your lawyer. I have a feeling you're going to need one. Lorenzo snarled as he was led away. This isn't over, Elliot. Patrick watched him go, a satisfaction settling over him. One down, one to go. The next morning, Patrick stood in the police station, watching through a two-way mirror as detectives interviewed Christine. She sat ramrod straight, her face a mask of indignation. This is ridiculous, she snapped. I don't know anything about forged wills or embezzlement. The detective slid a folder across the table. Then perhaps you can explain these emails between you and Mr. McCullough, or these bank transfers. Christine's composure cracked. I want my lawyer. Patrick turned to Ted, who stood beside him. What now? Ted's smile was predatory. Now, we go for the jugular. I've filed for an emergency divorce and asset freeze. Dr. Godfrey is prepared to make a statement to the board, backing you completely. And Trevor's evidence on Lorenzo's past crimes is damning. Patrick nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders. Let's finish this. The next few days were a whirlwind. Patrick presented the forged will and financial records to the police, watching as the case against Christine and Lorenzo grew stronger by the hour. Trevor Joseph's investigation had uncovered a trail of victims across 3 states, each with a similar story of seduction and betrayal. Dr. Godfrey stood before the university board, his voice ringing with conviction. Dr. Elliot is not only innocent of any wrongdoing, but he has been the victim of a vicious conspiracy. This university stands behind him completely. Christine and Lorenzo's attempts to fight back crumbled under the weight of evidence. Their lawyers looked increasingly desperate as each new piece of information came to light. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. Patrick straightened his tie as he prepared to take the stand. Ted gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "You've got this, Patrick. Just tell the truth." Patrick nodded, stepping up to the witness stand. As he was sworn in, he caught sight of Christine and Lorenzo, both looking pale and defeated. "Dr. Elliott," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court how you discovered the forged will." Patrick took a deep breath and began his story. He spoke of finding the will in his father's storage unit, of confronting Christine, of the threats and manipulation. He detailed the investigation, the evidence they'd uncovered, the elaborate trap they'd set for Lorenzo. As he spoke, Patrick could see the jury's expressions changing from skepticism to outrage. Christine's lawyer attempted to paint Patrick as unstable, but his calm, measured responses undermined their efforts. "Dr. Elliott," Christine's lawyer sneered, "isn't it true that you've been under immense stress lately? That you've been acting erratically?" Patrick's gaze was steady. "The only stress I've been under is that caused by discovering my wife's betrayal and the plot to steal everything I've worked for. My actions have been those of a man fighting to uncover the truth and protect himself from those who would destroy him." The lawyer faltered, unable to shake Patrick's composure. As the trial progressed, the prosecution's case seemed insurmountable. Bank records, emails, recorded conversations, the evidence piled up, painting a damning picture of Christine and Lorenzo's scheme. Then came the moment that sealed their fate. Lorenzo, seeing the writing on the wall, turned on Christine. "It was all her idea," he shouted, pointing at Christine. "She came to me, said she was tired of her boring husband, wanted more excitement, more money. She's the one who forged the will." Christine's face contorted with rage. "You lying bastard. You're the one who seduced me, who came up with this whole plan." The courtroom erupted into chaos as Christine and Lorenzo hurled accusations at each other. The judge's gavel banged repeatedly, calling for order. In the end, the jury's deliberation was brief. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The judge's voice was stern as he delivered the sentence. "Christine Elliott and Lorenzo McCullough, your actions show a callous disregard for the law and for basic human decency. You preyed on trust and manipulated emotions for your own gain. I hereby sentence you both to 15 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 10 years. Patrick watched as Christine and Lorenzo were led away in handcuffs, their faces masks of shock and anger. He felt no satisfaction, no joy, only a profound relief that it was finally over. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement. Patrick stepped up to the microphones, Ted and Dr. Godfrey flanking him. "Justice has been served today," Patrick said, his voice steady. "But this isn't a victory to celebrate. It's a tragedy, a reminder that trust can be betrayed, that people aren't always what they seem. My hope is that others can learn from this, can be more vigilant, more aware." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "To anyone out there who's been victimized, who's been manipulated or swindled, don't give up. Fight back. The truth will come out." As the reporters shouted questions, Patrick turned away. He caught sight of his sister Charlotte, standing at the edge of the crowd. She gave him a small, proud smile. Patrick walked down the courthouse steps, feeling lighter with each step. The road ahead would be challenging, rebuilding his life, learning to trust again. But he had emerged stronger, wiser, ready to face whatever came next. As he reached the bottom of the steps, Patrick took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. For the first time in months, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for all those who had been victimized by Christine and Lorenzo. Their reign of deception was over. Patrick turned to Ted and Dr. Godfrey. "Thank you, both of you. I couldn't have done this without you." Ted clapped him on the shoulder. "You did all the hard work, Patrick. We just provided the backup." Dr. Godfrey nodded in agreement. "The university is lucky to have you, Patrick. Take some time off, decompress. Your position will be waiting for you when you're ready." Patrick smiled, genuinely this time. "I appreciate that, Saul, but I think what I need now is to get back to work. To normalcy." As they walked away from the courthouse, Patrick's phone buzzed. It was a text from Trevor. Drinks to celebrate? First round's on me. Patrick chuckled, typing back a quick reply. Sounds perfect. Meet you in an hour. He pocketed his phone, looking up at the sky. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the city. It felt like a sign, a promise of brighter days ahead. Patrick Elliott had faced betrayal, fought back against seemingly insurmountable odds, and emerged victorious. He had reclaimed his life, exposed the truth, and ensured justice was served. The road ahead would be challenging, but Patrick knew he was ready. He had emerged from this ordeal stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. As he walked toward his car, Patrick allowed himself a small smile. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in months, he was looking forward to it.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
I've always seen my wife as my closest confidant, someone dependable and trustworthy. So it was a shock when she took a wrong turn and faced the consequences. Tonight, I hoped for a bonus, but I had doubts. It was the first time in 3 years I wore my dark blue tuxedo, looking sharp, yet feeling out of place. Instead of relaxing in my favorite chair with a drink, I found myself at a fundraiser with colleagues and spouses, a big social event in our small Midwest town. I'd asked my wife to dress up, and she certainly did, maybe too much. She looked stunning but overly tempting. At 35, she was at her peak beauty, turning heads as she descended the stairs in a revealing maroon dress. Despite her allure, she was mine, and I made that clear. While I'd rather be home, my wife seemed comfortable mingling with the city's elite. She had a natural charm, drawing people to her effortlessly. As I returned from the bar, I found her engrossed in conversation with Senator Thomas Norberto, a charming figure often compared to Tom Selleck. His presence seemed to captivate her like never before, leaving me feeling like a bystander to her infatuation. Noticing they ignored me, I stepped in, politely reminding the senator of my seat. He continued chatting with my delighted wife, so I intervened more assertively, placing drinks between them until he got the message. When he finally acknowledged my presence, he announced he'd leave to find his seat, dismissing me. Fuming, I returned to my place, calling him foolish. My wife defended him, claiming I was rude to a senator. I reminded her of our relationship boundaries, but she rolled her eyes, a move I always disliked. Avoiding a scene, I dropped the matter. Dinner passed, and the band resumed playing. I invited my wife to dance, but she refused, leaving me disappointed. While I chatted with others, I kept an eye on the senator, who eventually left for a veranda. Concerned, I found him there, arm around my wife, engaged in a serious conversation. I intervened, but someone stopped me, warning not to mess with the senator, forcing me out. "I'm warning you, that's my wife he's touching," I gritted out as I was pushed back into the ballroom. Demanding he retrieve her, I threatened a scene. He cursed quietly, turning back to the senator. Hess returned, appearing flustered, claiming ignorance. I grabbed her hand, leading her out. The ride home started in silence, but I knew it wouldn't last. She unleashed, accusing me of humiliating her. I defended my boundaries, reminding her of our marriage. "You're being possessive, crossing a line. You acted like a love-struck teen," she retorted, blushing. She remained silent, conceding my point. Our tension affected the kids, dinner becoming awkward. On Wednesday, she insisted on a serious talk, never a good sign. It ended poorly. She revealed plans to attend another fundraiser with the senator, calling it a non-date. I objected, questioning the appropriateness. She denied any wrongdoing, claiming innocence. I challenged her definition of a date, citing a double standard with her friend Angie. Her reaction confirmed my suspicions. She had issues with Angie, known for her charm. "It's completely different, you know that," she argued, claiming a date with a U.S. senator wasn't the same as a regular date. "There's a big distinction, right?" "Hess, you can't go out with another guy. We're married, remember?" I reminded her, emphasizing our vows. "You don't own me, Reggie, even though we're married," she retorted. "I can do what I want." "I'm not saying you're my property, but you're the mother of our kids. I don't want to break up our family," I pleaded, hoping to reach her. "You're being ridiculous," she dismissed, refusing to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. I was shocked when Hester appeared in a stunning white gown for her date. Our kids were amazed, asking why she was dressed up. She struggled to explain, but I intervened, bluntly stating the truth. As the doorbell rang, I confronted her with a choice, him or us. She opened the door to a security guard, revealing a black limo outside. "Remember to behave for Daddy," she said before leaving. I assumed it was her, stunned momentarily before focusing on my kids who needed attention. Drowning sorrows in booze wasn't an option. I planned a few FaceTime calls, one to my parents, one to hers. The kids enjoyed chatting with their grandparents. Starting with Hester's parents, I anticipated her recent actions would upset them. We laughed until Hester's absence was noticed. "Where's my daughter, Reggie? Have you hidden her?" my mother-in-law joked. I softly explained Hester was on a date with Senator Thomas Norberto, expecting her return the next day. Shocked, my in-laws couldn't believe I let her go. I tried reasoning with her, emphasizing family neglect, but she seemed convinced it was acceptable. The kids took over the conversation, a welcome distraction. My mother-in-law urged communication and patience. Later, I called my parents, receiving less sympathetic advice from my mother, who recommended a lawyer. After a few calls, I ordered pizza, watched a Disney movie with the kids, and struggled to sleep, distracted by ESPN. In the morning, I made pancakes and bacon, reassuring the kids their mom would return soon, even if it was uncertain. There was no rush to come home after spending the night with another man. The black limo arrived in our driveway around 1 p.m., catching the attention of our kids and neighbors. Usually they'd rush to greet their mom, but this time they stayed put, disappointed by her lackluster appearance. She still wore the same dress from the night before, now wrinkled and tired-looking. I sat in the living room as she entered, showing no eagerness to greet her. "Hey," she greeted, acknowledging our night apart. "Looks like you and the kids managed without me," I replied sharply. She headed upstairs, asking for rest and a shower. I raised my hands in mock surrender, realizing our relationship was over. Now, I focused on making things easy for my kids, avoiding becoming a weekend-only father. The question lingered. Could I stay until the kids graduated high school? When Hester finally came downstairs at 7 p.m., I'd already made dinner. I mentioned leftovers in the fridge, receiving a faint smile. The kids sensed tension and kept their distance. Alone, Hester accused me of poisoning their minds. I denied it, highlighting the impact of her actions on them and our neighbors. "I didn't break up our family," she defended, shifting blame to me. "It's up to you. If you can work on your ego issues, we can heal and keep our family together. But if you continue being petty and nasty, we'll have to go our separate ways, and you can be Mr. Part-Time Dad," she warned, catching me off guard. I had expected regret, not resistance and anger. "It's 1 p.m, you idiot," I retorted. "You couldn't get enough last night? Needed a half-day fling, huh?" She paused, avoiding my gaze. "We can get past this and go back to how things were. I know I hurt you and I'm sorry. But I needed this for myself and I don't regret it," she said, unapologetic. "That's a terrible apology if that's what it is," I remarked. "You're only sorry for hurting me, not for anything else." "It was amazing for you," she said defensively. My response matched her conviction. "Your actions betrayed our vows and our family." I recounted how surprised she was when I found her in our guest bedroom. "We can't move forward unless you try," she pleaded. "No, it's too late now," I clarified, locking her out of the room. I slept soundly that night, exhausted from 48 hours of tension. The next morning, I continued our Sunday brunch tradition, making Belgian waffles. "Mom looks rough, like she hasn't slept," Elise observed as we sat down to eat. "Maybe you should go out more on Friday nights," I suggested. Hess burst into tears and fled to the bedroom, leaving the children puzzled. "Did I say something wrong?" Elise innocently asked. "No, sweetheart, Mommy probably just missed the waffles," I reassured softly. Later, as I relaxed in my lazy boy watching the Cubs game, the bedroom door slammed open and a frantic Hester stormed in, ranting incoherently. "Calm down, honey. I can't understand you with all the drooling and spitting," I remarked. She sobbed, accusing me of making her seem promiscuous to her parents. "What's a Kardashian, Mommy?" Elise asked, joining the scene. I exchanged a glance with Hester, who composed herself and sent the kids to their rooms before confronting me. "Tell me," she demanded as soon as the kids were out of earshot. "I saw no reason to hide it from your parents since you were just following a senator to a fundraiser," I explained. "If they agree with me, it's not my fault. And by the way, my mom had a similar reaction, so watch out next time she's near." "No, it's not like that," she began, then stopped abruptly. An amazing experience, I interjected. If looks could eliminate, I'd be a stain on the chair. But it doesn't bother me much. I gestured for her to move so I could see the TV before she hurried out of the room. For the following 2 weeks, I slept in the guest room. Noticing this, I told the kids that I had a cold and didn't want their mother to catch it. I assumed Eliza had figured out my deception, but she prudently kept it to herself without saying anything. A 7-year-old child demonstrates impressive intelligence. One night, an hour after Hess had gone upstairs, I returned to our sharing bed and softly climbed into her. When the alarm went off the next morning, she snuggled up next to me. "It feels great," she muttered. "It's time to come to your senses." She attempted to touch me. I stopped her by placing my hand on her forearm and drawing her hand away. I adjusted our position so that we were facing each other on the bed. "Certain acts are best performed when you can make direct eye contact. Before I decide to sleep with you again, you will have to get tested and provide me with the results," I said softly. "You could be willing to trust Senator, but I am not." Tears welled in her eyes. She appeared to be about to say something, but then decided not to. Instead, she simply nodded. It revealed to me that she and the senator were not using protection. The scenario is growing very intriguing. Originally, I planned to stay until the kids finished high school, roughly another 14 years until Nate headed to college. My love for them made me willing to endure, but the prospect of long-term closeness absence, especially with an attractive woman under the same roof, seemed untenable. Despite concerns about my reputation, my feelings for her had dwindled over the past 2 weeks. Seeing her leave the bed with sadness no longer stirred me as it once did. My own pain prevented me from offering comfort. Who was she now? The woman I married would have understood my disapproval of her seeing someone else. Hester and I met in college, started dating 3 months later, and married within 2 years. She worked as an actuary, a job requiring precision and honesty, traits that balanced my spontaneity and humor. Despite our differences, I envisioned celebrating 50 years of marriage. Senator Thomas Norberto unexpectedly became a part of our lives. 10 days after returning to our shared bed, Hester handed me an envelope as I came home from work. Inside was her clear bill of health. "Hope you're satisfied," she coldly whispered. "You have no idea how humiliating this was. I may never face Dr. Sanjay again." "Not my fault, baby," I replied plainly. "Stay faithful, and you won't be embarrassed." She hissed softly but couldn't retort. As she walked away, I pressed on. "How often has Senator contacted you?" She began, but I silenced her with a gesture. With a grimace, she handed over her phone. I found texts and calls from him, but no evidence of further meetings. "Damn it," I exclaimed. "We're on thin ice." "Agreed," she returned seriously, pocketing her phone and heading to the kitchen. That night, she showed me affection in bed, and instinct took over. I didn't have feelings for her, I just fulfilled my needs. I knew she tried to win me back, but I was preoccupied. Hester's abrupt return home sparked neighborhood gossip. Sympathetic looks from men and smirks from women hinted at rumors. One evening, Eliza approached me asking about a women's club. I kept my composure, explaining Mommy's mistake and reassuring her. I hugged her, concealing my emotions, knowing this moment would haunt me forever. A feeling of normality gradually returned to our household, at least as far as I could see. Yet, it was a different kind of normalcy. Whether Hessa admitted it or not, things would never revert to how they were before that day. I couldn't fully trust her again, nor could I forgive or forget the profound disrespect she had shown me and our family. Love. To borrow from Tina Turner, what does love have to do with any of this? 6 months later, he seemed to grasp something or find the courage to speak up. Following that evening, which she instigated, I turned away from her to sleep, as had become customary since then. Before she said anything, I could hear her crying. "Reggie? Reggie, can we talk?" "What's up?" she asked meekly. "Sure," I sighed. "Could you please turn around?" Her tone conveyed clear irritation as she inquired. I sighed again, trying to mask her frustration. Then I turned to meet her gaze. She kept glancing at my eyes. "Do you realize how long it's been since we were close? Say it." "I did say it," I insisted. "You had the courage to do it, have the bravery to admit it. We haven't been close since I went on a date." "I noticed," she said. "You satisfy me physically, then sleep. You ensure I'm happy, but it feels purely physical. And you haven't hugged me since. I miss that. Closeness, you can't even say those words." "Baby," I replied. "Your date? You cheated on me with him. Admit it, I'm not stupid. You go on a date and don't come back until the next day. You make it seem cheap and disgusting." she protested. Yes, we were lovemaking on Saturday night, and it was great. He was gentle and caring, just like you. Really, it was an unforgettable experience. That's why we're not making love anymore. Yes, don't you see? You gave him something that, as you promised, was exclusively mine. And you enjoyed everything. It was unforgettable, as you said. Come on, Reg. It was only one night. 2 days. From a statistical standpoint, this is little compared to the hundreds of days we'll spend married. We can forget it, Reg, if you're willing to try, she pleaded. Thanks for the math lesson, but I've never seen our marriage as a math problem. Would you feel the same if I did it with Mary Jo Young? Mary Jo Young, a divorced blonde with a nice figure, lives close by. Almost every woman on our street watches her closely with her husband. Wait, are you suggesting you want Mary Jo? No way, she exclaimed. Listen to your inner voice. I never said I wanted Mary Jo. That was you. I was just wondering how you'd react if I did, I clarified. She looked puzzled until it clicked. Then her expression turned angry. I can read between the lines. No need for words, I replied smugly. She avoided eye contact. Do you realize, because of what happened, the other girls in the neighborhood bullied Eliza? They overheard their mothers calling you names. It wasn't pleasant, I informed her. Her anger shifted to disbelief at the news. Eliza never mentioned it. She took a breath, processing. I'm truly sorry. Sorry isn't enough. You call the night unforgettable. It was unforgettable, but for betrayal, I declared. With that, I turned away and went to bed, unaware of her next move. Credit is due to Hester. Over the next few months, she committed herself to being an exceptional mother. Traditionally, I had been the primary caregiver for our children. But suddenly, Hester took on her share of responsibilities, driving the kids to their various activities and offering them warm support. It made me wonder if she had finally realized that prioritizing our family over her own desires was essential to keeping us together. What a revelation. The children seemed to appreciate the extra attention, but once again, my daughter demonstrated her remarkable perceptiveness beyond her 8 years. Mom is really trying, Daddy, she said to me one day. I hope she gets a proper apology for whatever she did wrong. I tried to respond with a genuine smile, acknowledging her keen awareness of the world around her. Everything appeared normal in the Wilkerson household. I worked diligently to maintain appearances. As for Hester, she seemed eager to make tremendous efforts, not only to uphold appearances, but also to regain my favor. We were two individuals sharing a roof and enjoying certain benefits. Despite her strong desire for normalcy, she expected me to give in eventually. Somewhere within me, remnants of my affection for her remained. However, I couldn't erase 9 years of having her as the focal point of my life. She made things harder for herself by maintaining communication with Senator Prick. I checked her phone calls and messages shortly after her date. She made sure they were clear. Yet she didn't realize how easy it was to clone a phone and access all communications. He seemed to keep in touch regularly, while she tried to keep him at arm's length, at least for now. Can we schedule another date soon? I'll be in town, he texted nearly a month ago. My hubby is still upset from last time, she replied. I can't risk it. Needless to say, I wasn't impressed. A month later, we marked our 10th anniversary with a family trip to Chuck E. Cheese. The kids had a blast, but Hester didn't. She waited until the kids were playing games before expressing her disappointment with me. We've always marked our anniversaries, just the two of us, with a special night. You're altering tradition because you're still holding a grudge? When did you become so petty and small? She remarked, once more. The answer to that question is similar to many others about your date. You did this to me, to us, and to yourself, I replied. Can't you move past this? She pleaded. How often do you two communicate? I asked directly. She dared to smirk before reaching into her pocket, retrieving her phone and handing it to me. I tossed it high into the air and caught it easily when it fell. I understand you've been disloyal, but I also acknowledge your intelligence. I bet there's no evidence of your affair on that phone, not since I confiscated it the first time. However, there are records of past texts and calls that you may not have initiated, but I've never heard you explicitly reject the person. Why is that? Her cheeks flushed as she looked away. Yes, I knew that was a rhetorical question, I muttered. Amidst this turmoil, my career and my children provided stability. Though my colleagues often remarked that I looked like I needed a good night's sleep or even 6, I was convinced I was developing an ulcer. My hard drinks consumption had increased, and sleep was elusive. There were nights when I lay awake for hours, staring at my wife, wondering what went wrong. She insisted on loving me, justifying her actions as separate from our relationship. She felt entitled to her night out with Senator Prick and showed no guilt for her behavior, only regret for the injury she caused me. I waited for the other shoe to drop. Surprisingly, my mother-in-law became a source of strength during this challenging time. She repeatedly expressed regret for her daughter's actions. "We apologize, Reggie. We didn't raise her to be this selfish, but I really hope you can find a way to move past this." During one of her calls to check on me, she said, "I know what you're doing for the children." As I headed to the kitchen, I grabbed another cooler of beer to take outside. We were having our usual monthly summer picnic in the neighborhood. Outside, we had 2 grills going, offering a variety of hot and cold dishes, fruits, desserts, and drinks. The weather was perfect, sunny, and 80 degrees Fahrenheit with hardly a breeze. The gathering had started a few hours ago and was expected to continue for another 5 or 6. These gatherings were always enjoyable for both kids and adults alike. As I moved through the house, I heard female voices from our home office, typically off limits to non-family. I intended to redirect them to the family room or living area. While most activity happened outside, sometimes someone sought refuge indoors for AC or quiet talks. However, this particular space posed a problem. Yeah, when Reggie takes charge, I can't help but think of him. He's assertive, driven, and focused on his goals. Sometimes I can't shake the memory of that night. It's something I'll cherish forever, Hester declared to her companion as I approached the room. I halted in my tracks, my legs weakening, almost stumbling. "Damn, how many people know I'm being betrayed?" I heard laughter. Apparently there were 3 of them inside. I missed the rest of the conversation as I fought the urge to vomit. I was relieved to reach the restroom before getting sick, emptying everything from the night before, breakfast, and lunch. After tidying up, I brought the cooler of beer outside and gave 2 bottles to the guys manning the grills. "Hey, Reg, you all right? You seem a bit off," said John Lasky, casually concerned. "John, I'm good," I replied before drifting away. I stayed quiet for the rest of the gathering. When Hester and her friends returned, I felt eyes on me and noticed smirks aimed my way. Maybe I was losing it, but it seemed like almost every woman at the BBQ was sneering at me. Later that night, after putting the kids to bed and finishing the cleanup, I confronted my wife about my discomfort. She sat on a lounge chair, sipping a wine cooler, looking content. I joined her. "Did anyone show up today who doesn't know about your affair?" I asked sincerely. She looked taken aback. I returned her gaze, pretending innocence. "I might have mentioned it to a couple girlfriends recently. It was quite the experience," she chuckled. "He's a charming senator," I couldn't help but share. "So first you cheat, then you embarrass me in front of your friends, making every husband aware of your infidelity and branding me as a betrayed," I accused. "I'm not unfaithful, and I won't tolerate being labeled as such," she yelled back. "It was just one mistake. I didn't sleep with a stranger in some seedy motel." Her eyes flashed with intensity as she rose from her chaise lounge. "I've had enough of this," she declared, her voice growing louder. "You've been playing games for over a year now. Your wife had an affair with another man, a handsome and muscular man. It's time to move forward. I won't be held hostage by your insecurities any longer. If you can't let go, that's your problem. Either file for divorce or face reality. I'm tired of living a lie with you, pretending to be the perfect couple. Decide now." Her outburst caught me off guard, and I sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours. She had already walked away, leaving me alone, even though I had just regained consciousness. I'm naturally reserved and slow to react, which some, including my wife, interpret as weakness. I seldom panic or act hastily. It pains me to think about not seeing my children every day, but I'm hopeful to salvage my family. I had braced myself for the worst, with a lawyer on standby to fight for me, so I took action. First thing Monday morning, Hester was served with divorce papers at her workplace before the day was out. As expected, she was not pleased. About 5 minutes after being served, my phone began buzzing incessantly. Ignoring all her calls, I anticipated the brewing storm upon my return home. Stepping into the house from the garage, Hester exploded in anger. "You fool!" she shouted. "Your fragile male ego is bruised and you humiliate me in front of my colleagues." "Just as you embarrassed us in front of our friends and neighbors the other day," I retorted. "You practically begged me to file." "So I did." She shot me a scornful look but remained silent. Putting down my belongings, I approached my children for a brief chat, reassuring them of my unwavering love despite us no longer sharing a home starting tomorrow. Elise grasped the situation, having friends with divorced parents, but Nate seemed puzzled. I knew he would struggle, but I was confident my daughter would lend support. Living in a no-fault state made the divorce process seem straightforward. She was expected to receive primary custody of the children, the house, child support, and some alimony. But no, she vehemently contested. For some inexplicable reason known only to her, her lawyer employed various tactics to prolong the proceedings, including insisting on meetings and even suggesting marital counseling. What's the deal? Have your actions spoken louder than your words? You say you love me, yet you've caused so much turmoil. And then you have the nerve to tell your friends he's the best you've ever had. Why would I want to remain in this marriage if all I get is aggravation? I love my kids, but if I stay with you, they'll only remember an embittered man, I expressed in one session. But I love you, Reg. Are you fixated on one incident? Yes, he was exceptional, but it was a one-time mistake. Please forgive me, she pleaded. I can't, Hess, I replied. You broke our vows and belittled their importance. I can't overlook that. You made promises to me. I hadn't planned to do this. Truly, I hadn't, but everyone has a breaking point. The beauty of a two-party political system lies in its contrast. Regardless of how you spin it, Senator Prick belonged to one side, meaning the opposing party would welcome anything that tarnished his reputation over a year ago. After Hester's affair, I devised a backup plan. I sought the help of a well-connected lawyer in our city to approach the chairman of the opposing political party, who was eager for anything that could damage the senator's chances of re-election and White House aspirations. Despite promising a hefty monetary reward, they eagerly awaited the information. He had to agree that the evidence would only be revealed if the possessor requested it. Every month, my lawyer kept me informed about the chairman's persistent requests. This month, we were ready to fulfill the chairman's demands. The meeting, my first involvement, was set in my lawyer's office. After introductions, I took out a sealed plastic bag from my briefcase and placed it on the conference table. The chairman's surprise was evident upon seeing the bag's contents. "Dear God," he muttered. "Is that what I think it is?" "If you suspect it's evidence that could end Senator Prick's career," I replied, "then yes." They regarded the bag as if it held precious gold bars. He refrained from touching it, instead continuing to stare in amazement. "That arrogant woman returned home and went upstairs for a shower," I recounted. "Since she handles the laundry, she probably assumed I wouldn't go through the basket." I waited until I heard the water running before entering the bathroom and finding the underwear at the bottom of the hamper. Everyone these days is familiar with DNA from television. I'm confident that when you test these, you'll find two distinct sets. Also, here's her toothbrush for DNA comparisons. I assume you'll obtain the senator's sample for matching, unless you already have it, I said, giving the chairman a stern look. He reddened and glanced away, just as I anticipated. I knew he grasped all the complexities of the case, so there was no need to reiterate them. However, I sensed his unspoken question in his expression. Why? Because she lacks the intelligence to realize she shouldn't cross me. She betrayed me, yet she arrogantly assumes I'll eventually forgive her. Now she's flaunting it in front of me. To hell with her and the senators she associates with, I declared. Your career is finished, Thomas. Damn you, Norberto, you foolish woman. How on earth could your weak husband obtain evidence of our weekend together? I suspected he was aware, but there was evidence. How Norberto raged at Hester on the phone a week after my meeting with the chairman, I do not know. I have no clue what you're talking about, she faltered. The phone call caught me off guard. I used to clone hers. I essentially admitted to her that I had tapped her phone some months ago and that they hadn't been communicating through that means, if at all. What did you do wrong? She asked when I returned her call 90 minutes later. I understood what she meant, but I was feeling vengeful, or so I thought. I just ordered a pepperoni pizza with garlic bread. Why do you care what I eat? Wait, how do you know what I eat? She snapped at me. From past encounters, I could tell she despised my foolish actions. While she may have seemed to view me as feeble, she knew better. Well, I guess being right about one thing out of two wasn't too bad. I'm not sure how you managed it, but it seems you got back at Senator Norberto in some way. He threatened to rough me up for something you did, though he wouldn't say what. Thanks, by the way, my parents are livid. Yours are too. Elise has been avoiding me, and you can't seem to grasp that what Thomas and I did was unrelated to our relationship. Yes, about that, I started. Senator Norberto, who was seemingly assured of retaining his seat, suddenly dropped out of the Senate race 8 months before the election, citing significant mental fatigue. With everything else going on in my life, seeking female companionship was the least of my concerns. I hadn't looked at a woman in an appealing way for months until my daughter brought it up. "Daddy, when do you plan to start seeing other women?" Elise asked casually. My children joined me for the second weekend. "Linda's mom really wants to go out with you." I was stunned. My jaw must have dropped. Lost in the chaos of divorce, I hadn't thought much about my future beyond taking care of my kids. Every other weekend and a few weeks during the summer, Linda's mom brought it up. "And you're okay with that?" I asked, surprised. "Well, she didn't directly tell me, Dad." Elise revealed she overheard her talking with Annie's mom, but yeah, I'd be fine with it. "Dad, I don't want you to be alone, but please, not Marcy's mom. None of us kids liked her. Kids pick up on things, Dad." Linda's mom had been divorced from her for about 5 years. "I had a terrible husband." She was a charming, lively blonde with curves who still carried the spirited vibe of her old cheerleading days. I had never considered she might be interested in me. When you're married, you don't think about other women's possibilities. At least I didn't. Was I naive? Elise was quietly keeping an eye on me. "It's okay, Dad. I'm almost 9. I understand about divorce and all. Nate and I will be fine. Just take care of yourself." It seemed like I was back in the dating scene. Linda's mom, Julie, became my first date after re-entering the dating pool, and it felt nice, though somewhat obligatory. I explained to her that emotionally, I wasn't ready for anything serious yet, considering my recent return to dating. She responded with a comforting smile, telling me I didn't owe an explanation to every person I dated. Julie offered valuable advice, almost like a crash course on navigating life with divorced parents. She also mentioned that I would catch the eye of other divorced moms among my children's friends, given my reputation as a good father with a successful career and, well, not unattractive. She blushed a bit when she mentioned the last part. I went on to date Julie and a few other divorced mothers. Sometimes I hardly thought about my ex-wife, Hester, or our past marriage. While I admitted to feeling lonely at times, it wasn't enough to consider reconciling with her. I refused to entertain the idea of her betraying me again. Hester, however, quickly dismissed her affair as a foolish mistake, promising never to repeat it. "A foolish mistake?" I scoffed. "It was poor judgment, a lack of respect, and ultimately selfishness. You prioritized an affair with the senator over your family's well-being?" Her mouth opened and closed twice. I sensed her desire to respond, but she remained speechless. I half expected her to persist, despite the fact that she couldn't justify her actions, especially now that contacting the senator seemed pointless. One Saturday during dinner while the kids and I were visiting, my ex-mother-in-law informed me that he had asked her never to contact him again. "He seemed to think you played a role in his decision to withdraw from the Senate election and that she didn't intervene enough," she recounted. I raised an eyebrow and continued eating quietly, opting not to comment. A few months later, some guys from work suggested going to a new upscale bar with a dance floor. When I was married, I avoided Thursday evening outings like the plague, but now that I'm single, I find myself going out regularly. 4 of us found a table, ordered drinks, and soaked in the atmosphere of the place. I noticed the 2 women as soon as they walked in. The first woman looked to be in her early 40s, but dressed more in line with individuals over 30, aiming to evoke a youthful vibe. She wore a silk blue shirt, slightly unbuttoned, and a short skirt accentuating her long, toned legs. With short, dark brown hair and green eyes, she seemed brimming with confidence. On the other hand, her friend seemed out of place in the pub setting. Slightly older than her companion, possibly in her early 40s, she exuded refinement and wealth. Clad in a sweater and skirt from a high-end store, she radiated elegance and beauty with her shoulder-length silver blonde hair and dark eyes. Seating themselves at a nearby table, the women quickly caught the attention of males eager to engage or dance with them. I couldn't shake the desire to dance with one of them. Particularly the dark-haired woman seemed ready for some fun, if not more. She readily accepted dances from every man who approached her. In contrast, the blonde woman danced sparingly and seemed more reserved in her movements. An hour later, I resolved to invite the blonde woman to dance. However, as I approached her table, the brunette grabbed my hand and whisked me onto the dance floor. I became completely captivated by her and forgot about her companion. We danced to upbeat songs until the tempo slowed. When she passionately kissed me, I was entranced. We left the club together and went to my place. Our passion carried over into the bedroom, and that night she shared details of her life. It turned out she and her friend were celebrating her recent divorce. Rosie proved to be an amazing lover, and we dated for about a month before she expressed hesitancy to commit so soon after her divorce. I respected her perspective, and we parted amicably. However, since our initial encounter, I've never had the chance to inquire about her friend, which sparked my curiosity. A few weeks later, I found myself alone in the bar of another upscale establishment, seeking solace with a drink. It wasn't my turn to care for the children after a long week, so I had the weekend to myself. She entered the room solo, capturing everyone's attention. Her figure resembled Megan from Stallion, with a cascade of rich brown locks framing her face and draping over her shoulders. Striding over in 4-inch stilettos, she settled next to me. Instantly, I felt like I'd stepped into heaven. I scrambled for a clever opening line, but before I could speak, she gazed into my eyes and asked for my drink order. I replied with a sly grin, feeling a twinge of envy at her poise, and my thoughts scattered. "Excellent choice," she purred. "A man with impeccable taste." Ordering the same undiluted drink as mine, she spent the evening sharing about the boutique marketing company she founded years ago. Remarkable. Not only was she captivating and intelligent, but she also ran a thriving business. Later, we departed for her charming apartment. She mentioned her preference for lovemaking in her own bed, a common sentiment among women, and delved into the psychology behind it. With her impeccably toned physique, I couldn't believe she was 45. Our first encounter was unforgettable. She was an exceptional kisser, and I felt a connection with her unlike any since my date with Hester. In just one night, Maria Washington opened up to me more honestly than Hester ever had. During our 9-year marriage, Maria confessed her dedication to her career and lack of desire for children, preferring casual relationships with various men. Despite developing genuine feelings for her, knowing a traditional relationship wasn't an option, I agreed to be friends with benefits for the next year. We met monthly until Marielle unexpectedly fell in love with a much younger man. "You're one lucky guy," my ex-mother-in-law would occasionally call me. Despite the divorce, we remained close, bound by mutual understanding and our grandchildren. I still referred to them as Mom and Dad. "Could I ask you a favor, Reg?" she inquired cautiously. "Of course, as long as it doesn't involve your daughter," I replied. It was a matter of courtesy to take my mother-in-law's request to bring her personal assistant to their upcoming company Christmas party seriously. She's a good-hearted person, Reg. She went through a divorce a few years ago from an abusive cheater, and I don't think she's dated anyone since. She was hurt, Reg, and she needs a decent guy to show her that not all men are scoundrels. And I think you're a decent guy, my ex-mother-in-law explained. Isn't it odd when your former mother-in-law tries to set you up on a date? Just one thing, Mom, I interjected. Please tell me she's not boring. Mom caught on to the humor and chuckled. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, Reggie. You might even let us keep the kids for a night or two, she teased. Mom was spot on. I was pleasantly surprised. Cheryl, or Sherilyn as she preferred, was a delightful bundle of charm with a well-proportioned figure. She was warm without being overly effusive, and she had a delightful habit of wrinkling her nose and squinting her green eyes when she was amused. Equally important, she had a genuinely great personality. I made a point of sticking close to Sherilyn throughout the evening, giving her my full attention, much like I would have with my ex-wife. Sherilyn seemed appreciative of the gesture. While she engaged in conversation, she tended to defer to others, which I suppose was understandable given her upbringing. We sat with my in-laws at a table. Mom was as graceful as ever, while Dad was more reserved. At first I understood his demeanor, but he grew more open as the evening progressed. I surprised Jerry with my dancing skills, which I had honed to please my ex-wife, Hester, who loved to dance. Sherilyn also demonstrated proficiency, especially in faster dances. And she complimented me perfectly in slow dances, as if we had been dancing together for years. I savored the feeling of her body against mine as I escorted Sherilyn to the door. She gave me a gentle kiss on the lips and handed me her phone number. I realized I owed my in-laws more time with their grandchildren. After 3 days, I called Sherilyn to ask her out. She agreed to a date the following Friday at one of the city's finest Italian restaurants, followed by an art exhibit at a nearby gallery. Sherilyn dressed more provocatively for our date than she did at the Christmas party, which impressed me even more. We had a wonderful time, and we went out 3 more times before I felt it was time for her to meet my 8-year-old daughter and for me to meet hers. We spent quality time together, playing mini-golf and enjoying a picnic in a nearby park. Overall, I felt it went smoothly, particularly because the 2 girls developed a strong bond. However, as expected for his age, my kid wasn't thrilled because he believed all girls had cooties. Sherry and I met several times a week, and when I had my children, we engaged in family activities together, including all 5 of us. Everything was going well until a few weeks into the new school year, when I received an unexpected phone call from Hester. "I'm not sure what your girlfriend has been teaching my kids, but your son was in the principal's office today for fighting, and his face is all beaten up. He's been suspended for 3 days, and all he can say is that it all started with this Monique girl he keeps calling his sister," she raged over the phone. "First and foremost, you have no right to call my girlfriend names like that. I'll come over after dinner and take Nate out for ice cream. Let's not jump to conclusions until we know exactly what happened," I responded calmly. I heard her sigh before she hung up. After dinner, I picked up Nate and took him to a small, family-owned ice cream parlor. As soon as he got into my car, I conducted a thorough visual inspection. He had a cut on his lip and a scratch on the left side of his face. He joked, "You should see the other guy, Dad." "What's the truth, Nathan Abraham?" I responded with his full name to emphasize seriousness. He winced at the mention of his first and middle names. "A kid was bullying Mo, Dad. I told him to leave my sister alone. He threw the first punch. Then I punched him hard. They say I broke his nose. It made a loud crack, and there was blood everywhere," he explained, trying to hide a grin. "The boy who bothered Mo was 2 years older than Nate. Will Mo tell me the same story?" I asked. "Absolutely, Dad. I wouldn't have punched him if he hadn't thrown the first punch. I was just defending Mo. You always tell me to look out for Allie, so I figured it applied to Mo, too." "She's really small, Dad," Nate said. Nate had a valid point. Monique inherited her mother's petite stature, making her at least half a head shorter than most of her peers. I had always stressed to Nate the importance of looking out for his sister, and it seemed he now saw Monique as part of his family. It was fascinating how the innocence of childhood sometimes outweighed the wisdom of experience. "I commend you for protecting Mo, but let's keep it between us," I told him. "I'll speak with the principal and see what can be done. You might want to update your mother on Mo's status. It seems you and Elise haven't been keeping her fully informed about my life, which I appreciate. However, it might be better coming from you and Elise," I said. I mentioned that my 7-year-old understood completely. Children mature quite quickly these days. "And Dad, when are you and Sherry tying the knot? She's amazing, you know," he added. As I mentioned earlier, kids grow up fast, and he was right. It was time to make a commitment to that woman. The following day, I reached out to the principal. The school had a strict zero-tolerance policy for fighting, regardless of whether it was self-defense. However, they also had a zero-tolerance policy for bullying. As a result, the aggressor received a 6-day suspension following interviews with witnesses. Although I disagreed with the policy, I advised him not to contest his punishment manually. Furthermore, I assured him of my support and promised to propose to Sherry as soon as I could afford the ring. Things got complicated when Hester discovered Sherry was Mom's personal assistant and that Mom had scheduled their first meeting. "What on earth, Mom? Aren't you supposed to be on my side?" Hester yelled later. "According to Mom, there's no your side," Mom replied. "He's not coming back to you. You completely messed that up. So why let a good man go to waste? Carolyn is a wonderful woman and a great friend. She deserves someone like Reggie." Mom described Hester's scream as horrifying as she recounted the incident. While both my children enjoyed Sherry's company, my daughter in particular seemed to admire her nurturing demeanor towards me. Sherry had a natural inclination to fulfill my desires, making me feel like the master of my domain. This, in turn, encouraged me to treat her like my queen. Elise seemed to enjoy witnessing the affectionate banter between Sherry and me. "I'm not sure if you two are endearing or nauseating," Elise remarked one day, "but I enjoy being around to witness it." A couple of months later, our lovemaking wedding only included our 3 children, my parents, and my ex-in-laws as guests. The court clerk who officiated the ceremony was surprised when my ex-mother-in-law stood as Sherry's maid of honor. "It's quite a story," I chuckled when she inquired. "Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition to come from the classic British comedy ensemble Monty Python's Flying Circus. But truth be told, nobody expects an inquiry from a federal marshal either." I was taken completely by surprise when 2 officials entered my office on a Monday morning. It seemed the authorities were upset about a certain former senator's altercation and subsequent injury in the restroom of an upscale restaurant in Houston, Texas. My name, along with that of several other aggrieved husbands, emerged as potential suspects. "I can't say I'm sorry to hear about the senator's troubles. Nobody, and I truly mean that, deserves it more," I remarked to the disgruntled marshals. "You do realize that the fool slept with my then-wife almost 4 years ago. If I had any intentions, wouldn't I have acted long before now?" I retorted with heavy sarcasm. However, the grilling from the federal agents was just the beginning. A week later, a reporter from the Associated Press showed up at my office seeking details about the aforementioned incident. It appeared he had somehow obtained a confidential roster of 26 women the senator allegedly had affairs with during his time in office. At this point, several individuals were aware of Hester's rendezvous with the senator. Though I certainly didn't publicize it over the years, Hester likely disclosed it to more people than I did. As she took pride in her achievement, however, I couldn't help but wonder about her level of pride when news of the senator's misconduct emerged, implicating her as one of his lovers. "Why did you disclose that to him?" she practically yelled at me over the phone. "I didn't. He informed me that your name was on the senator's roster. All I did was confirm the accuracy of your inclusion on the list. I wasn't going to fabricate to spare you from embarrassment." "Promiscuous. I am not promiscuous," she screamed at me before I ended the call. I must confess I chuckled. I also entertained the thought of taking an extended vacation out of town when the news article broke. She messed up, literally. And yet I was going to suffer an embarrassing fallout as well. Cherry talked me out of that notion. "Don't engage in any confrontation. Stick to the truth. She cheated on you, divorced her. Move on," Cherry advised. Unfortunately, my children were going to endure verbal bullying for the remainder of their school years. We would be addressing the fact that their mother was a self-centered cheater for years to come. I also sympathized greatly with my ex-in-laws, who had become close friends of ours. After the article came out, we invited them to stay with us in the house we had purchased for a couple of weeks. During that time, they mostly stayed indoors and avoided answering their phones. I adore my daughter. You grasp the parental emotions, but I'm deeply ashamed that she thought it acceptable to engage in promiscuous behavior, Dad confessed. No father wants his daughter to be perceived in that manner. As time elapsed, the scandal dissipated, and life resumed its usual course. Gradually, my children began spending more time with Cherry, Mo, and me at our house. It wasn't formal, but our home naturally evolved into the neighborhood kids' gathering spot. Initially, Hester objected, but I believe things smoothed over. Furthermore, I ensured Elise and Nate maintained open communication with Hester to prevent her from accusing me of alienating her children again. Mom and Dad's frequent visits helped alleviate tensions. When the kids were with me, we seldom discussed Hester. Although she remained their mother, she became an ex in my life. They also refrained from mentioning her out of respect for Sherry, whom they now referred to as Mom. Initially, I sensed discomfort from Hester's parents when the kids started calling Cherry Mom, but that soon faded as they had been close to Cherry even before our marriage. Amidst the upheaval in my life and my family's, I paid scant attention to Hester's affairs. I knew she occasionally dated based on the kids' remarks, but I was startled when Elise announced one afternoon that her mother was engaged. A wave of sadness engulfed me for what might have been. Then, I felt a comforting embrace envelop me, and my sorrow swiftly transformed into joy for what I now possessed.